Good evening and welcome to part 15 of Mapping Kalegen. It seems hard to believe we're 15 parts in. You may notice that my camera has a completely different setup. That's because I've stolen my normal camera, because we found out last night that the map cam that we were using for our streams, or at least setting up for our streams when we go live with the Enemy Within campaign, just wasn't good enough. So I've taken the one from here to see if it does any good, and I'm using my third, I don't know, one of my other cameras here, and it has a completely different look, and I feel really small, and simultaneously my hands look really big. It's a bit more of a fisheye going on here. Not entirely sure whether I like it. Fortunately, for the course of this stream, I'm going to be mostly tiny and sitting down in the corner, so we don't need to worry too much about that as we skip it out like so. Right, for those of you who haven't been with us before, what we do is we map a section of the city of Kalegen through the course of these streams. Kalegen is a diplomatic center in the Reikland, which is one of the primary realms of the Empire in the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay setting. I am looking forward to this evening because I have had a super tough week. There have been all manner of things to do on my businessy side of things, and on the streaming side of things, also all manner of stuff to do. And it has been busy in both. If you've been following the Warhammer blog, you've probably already seen my behind the scenes streams about the studio and where it's currently at, also our sound and where it's currently at. And if you check the sound test video, that's where you're going to see me pootling around with our test setup. But most importantly, you'll see the map cam on that is super low res, much lower resolution than we had any expectation of it being. I've twiddled with the camera tons and it's remaining low res, so I'm replacing it. So how do we do this? So I choose a bit of the town. Sometimes it's already pre-selected. Sometimes, like this evening, I know what I'm going to be doing, and I'll detail that in just a moment. I'll ask for ideas what to put on that part of the town, or in this case, city, because it's going to have a big cathedral of Sigmar. And I'll talk through those ideas as they're hopefully suggested by you in the stream. I'll bring up comments like this. Hello, Yalib. Or like this, hello Nico, delighted to see that you're here. And Martin, and let me just pop back to Yalib for a second. I believe you're playing D&D this evening. Have I accidentally caught you on an evening when D&D fell through? Was it hard to pull everyone together, or are you just going out to do that later? Martin drops in and says, oh, purples. Yeah, we have some purples on the screen. I mean, if you're going to be playing the Enemy Within, purple pretty much has to be your core color, if you ask me. Plus, anyone who knows me from the 1990s knows that I used to wear purple a heck of a lot, so I'm not entirely unsatisfied with that as a sartorial choice for the stream. Oxecutor drops in and says hello as well. Great to see you here, Oxecutor. Delighted to see you made it live. Shark Legion Kane. Hello, Shark Legion Kane. I don't remember you from any of our previous streams. Delighted to see you here. As I mentioned already, if you have any ideas for anything that we're going to be mapping, please do just suggest them in the stream as we go, and we'll talk them all out. Alexander R drops in as well. Great to see you, Alexander. Delighted to see you made it. And finally, Esty arrives in with an evening, everyone. And good evening to you as well, Esty. Looking forward to seeing what sort of ideas we can place in the next part of the map. And Yalib's adding, presumably to answer my question. Now, it's just delayed 30 minutes, so I'm catching the start here. Delighted that you caught the start. I can't decide whether it's a sad thing or a good thing, because you might want to be a part of what we're about to start creating, because I have, without really much hesitation at all, because I have had such a tough week. I'm going to map part of the town that I've been looking forward to doing, which is, if I just get my, there we go, the palace. I'm going to start on the new palace that has been built by the Holzkrooks. It's got quite a few locations that we've discussed in previous streams that we might want to drop in here, one of which is a menagerie, one of which is a relatively big gardens, one of which is a big tower that was originally designed for celestial wizards and is currently being occupied by Holzkrug's daughter. And I do recommend going through to some of our earlier streams if you want to know a little bit more about her. The stream in particular we'll be looking for is the stream where we are discussing this part of town here. So that's probably about stream 2, stream 3, around about there. Part 2, part 3. I think someone else in the stream and the comments might know it better. So I'm going to go through the palace today. Now, we have a few things to discuss before we go. And again, I'm really looking for extra ideas from you as we go as well. Number one is, how big do we go? I think we go pretty big. one of the issues I have with sorting out a palace inside the city is that we're not going to get ourselves our big gardens that always look super impressive for visiting diplomats. And as we've discussed multiple times before, Halskrug, so Leipmund Halskrug, he's the lord here. He's effectively the High Lord Ambassador for all of the Reikland. He is an incredibly important diplomatic figure, not just in the Reikland, but in the Empire as a whole. So having something to impress all of his visiting dignitaries is something that would be high on his list. But, and this is the bit that's been kicking around in the back of my head for a while, he is a descendant of emperors. His family, the Halskrugs, were emperors before the Halswig-Schlesens up in Altdorf. And they are a well-respected family, but most importantly, they've got quite a lot of holdings, including, I presume, a large imperial palace of their own, the Halskrug equivalent of Castle Reikland, for example. So they're already going to have a large palace, and I think that's where they're going to be holding most of their gardens and the really impressive, let's say, topiary and garden areas that they'll be taking people to. But I think that'll be reserved for very special folk. The far more easy to access location here on the river is almost a secondary garden, but the primary palace. I think he almost certainly will have built a bigger one, the one that he has back where he holds court. I imagine that palace is going to be a lot smaller, probably a fortified castle that has been expanded over time. And this is his opportunity to build the palace he always wanted, but not necessarily with the gardens he always wanted. Compromises are always going to be made, particularly because so much of this was just hacked free from the surrounding forest. And it's super important to them that it was done relatively quickly. So I'm thinking not the biggest gardens, but a particularly large palace. But I'm happy to take ideas from anybody as we go. So if you've got any idea for how this may present, do bring it up in the comments. If you've got any ideas for what it might look like, how many buildings we should probably have, or alternatively, if there's any extra buildings, secondary palaces, small nooks, chapels, or alternative temples, something that might be important to maybe one of the previous Halskrugs since this place was built. And this place is probably going to be around about 50 years old at the oldest. So we're really only looking at Leipmund Halskrug's father, perhaps, his mother, maybe some other relative, his wife and his daughter. So they're the primary stakeholders, so to speak, in terms of what we need to make sure that we definitely represent. But we could also add to that with other individuals who are potentially important. So there's quite a lot of different potential ways of doing this. One thing I definitely think we need to do is make sure, though, that we can host one of the biggest soirees in the Reikland, which means that we are, in my version of the Reikland, there is an entire season of parties that all the important nobles, not just of the Reikland, but of large parts of the empire, attend. And this particular season runs for so many months near the beginning of the year into the summer. And then everyone sort of decamps to other courts around the empire until eventually they move down to the winter courts in Nuln. And move down south there for the winter season. And then they come back up for the spring season into the Reikland. So we're going to need to make sure that we can host a big party, like a super big one, which means that we've got to have enough space for large ballrooms, salons, nooks and crannies, lots of places for people to gather, dance, talk, discuss, politic, do the noble thing, and generally impress the lower orders. So we've got to make sure this place is pretty sizable. We're not talking about, say, for example, in Lord of Ubersreich, the last adventure in the Rough Days and Hard Nights book. That was a really small townhouse, effectively. Or if we look at, say, Castle Sternauer in, again, the same book, Rough Nights, Hard Days. Again, that's a castle, half of which has collapsed to dilapidation. But again, I think we're probably looking at something that's less defensible and much more party. So if you've got any examples of that, do drop them up as links. Now, because of the way the comments work on YouTube, you can't bring up link comments here, but you can pop over into our Discord and pop up comments into the Kalegen thread in there. So for those of you who are on our Discord, I'll quickly put a quick, in fact, Alexander's already popped a map of Prague Castle in there, but I'll just write the word here over in Discord. So if you've got any links that you want to share, do drop them in there as we build up our big palace. And again, I think the important word here is palace, not defensible castle. We're looking significantly past the era of knights and castles and high towers into the more, we're attempting to impress large windows, big open flat spaces. Again, though, we want to make sure this looks like the Empire, so we're going to be tearing this up a little bit. We're going to be adding all manner of small towers and swirls and nooks and crannies and all types of you know, Warhammery gubbins. That's what we're looking for. So if you've got any ideas for that, do bring them up in the comments. I'm now going to run through the comments that we have so far, and we'll get to organizing the space a little bit and start drawing. Quite looking forward to this. Yalib drops, got to make sure you goons are not turning everything upside down. We totally are turning everything upside down. Just wait till this palace is done. It's going to be awesome. Next, Martin Ironroot drops in and says, polish millers to create visual illusion of large gardens, avenues, and hosts of confusing masquerades or chase scenes. Something like that might be a good idea, perhaps drawing upon the... So we're going to probably... We're going to have at least one elf in support of the palace who may have magics that could support as well. We've got at least one engineer who's in another part of the town who could... the engineer is down here. There we go. Just bring it up. I'm going to get my pen up now so that we can actually start showing things on the map as we're going. So let me just grab my pen and drop off a brush. I've still got the brushes from the tutorial last night, actually. Did a tutorial last night about doing forests. For those of you who this isn't the tutorial, this is just the examples that I did when we were doing them. The Rookery does tutorials about mapping all the time, and it was a super good fun one. We'll maybe discuss that at a later date. But anyway, we've got our engineer who's here as well, and he could potentially, or she could potentially, provide a variety of support things. But the Empire's got a weird technology level where it's both ahead of what you'd expect for a similar time period in the real world and sort of behind. But polished mirrors and equivalent are well within their capabilities. I mean, heck, they can build engineering horses that actually work without magic. So there's definitely within their know-how. Anyway, moving on. Alexander then adds a palace with several courts. Maybe some of the courts in the back are not finished enough to be hidden from visiting dignitaries. No, I think this place is finished. If anywhere got the focus from Hallskrug, it's here. This is the place where he's going to be repeatedly hosting people. He doesn't want this to be smoke and mirrors in terms of the overall size of the place. This is where he's going to plow his money, and is one of the reasons that things like the Temple of Verena that was here was unfinished. One of the reasons why entire sections of the town have sunk and not been properly attended to, while parts of the town have turned to slum that used to be relatively middle class just 20, 30 years ago. Large areas that were originally designed over 70 years ago to be a thriving middle class area, again, collapsed to slum. And much of that is because of overtaxation and the funneling of funds from some of the other building projects to make sure that this worked. So I think if we're looking for anywhere to be relatively complete, it should be here. And I think that it reinforces the difference between our upper class, our hubs, and our mid to lower classes, our have-nots. And it will nail down hard the difference because they have, and they very much should have. And I think that our little middle class section here is going to be getting shouldered out as the area expands, as extra gardens are needed. We can do lots of fun things to basically show the rich are rich. Alexander then adds, the Castle of Prague is a good example, having several courts. Yes, so there's a link for that already up in, oops, go away. Google was trying to open up that link for me there. There's already a link over in Discord, so do go take a check of that for anyone who wants to have a look. I am going to open it up, so I apologize while I quickly open that over there. That's a really nice looking big. I'm just busy looking at the castle map just now. Recommend you go have a look at that. I'll bring up the actual comment link here. So for those of you who are not on our Discord, or if you're coming to this later, you can quickly grab the map easily. So that's it there. Hopefully I can copy and paste the links in easily. So there we go. That's that one. Mark drops in. Hi, Mark. Great to see you here. Hopefully you got some cool ideas to add in. Nico then drops in and says, our room to think about how he's going to take over the empire while sitting on a throne, prepared for that future. Conaning his way in the corner. Yeah, I think that's probably almost a certain. A little bit like Drachenfels has got his big room where he contemplates the entirety of the Reikland and the Paravon and elsewhere as it lays out before him. Always good fun. Yeah, then says, oh, Andy, remember you owe me a glass ceiling room somewhere? Perhaps a dance room. I think this is a great idea. Perhaps this is where we have our big glass dome and we can really impress with this. So we can have the entire dome depicting perhaps the life of Sigmar, if we want to reinforce the Sigmarite angle. But as we've already discussed, the Sigmarites are so staunchly pro Karl Franz that I think that he's going to be trying to attract and appeal to more than just the Sigmarites. So perhaps we want to have ourselves, say, a 20-paneled window. Each one of the panels depicting one of the star signs and going down to an associated god. So we can have a massive, huge stained glass windows casting multicolored lights down over the big ballroom that lies below during the day, and at night they can be lit up on the outside so that anyone that looks up into the stars and they can see the constellations laid out above them will also see the gods looking down on them. So in many we can drop ourselves some lovely mottos about gods looking down on their great works or something like that. I think that works really well for a massive glass dome, and it also gives the PCs a lovely place to potentially enter it if they're not meant to be there, or to smash it if you're looking for a more destructive resolution to a particular scenario that you may be playing. It's definitely something that will come hand in hand with enormous cost. So PCs will almost certainly, should they take the more destructive route, end up hightailing it out of Kalegen, almost certainly as Outlaws, which is, as we all know, a classic Warhammer staple. I'm going to shift my camera slightly because apparently I'm sort of hiding behind the comments there. That helps a little bit. Alexander then adds, Prague Castle was built with impressive first and defense second. Absolutely. I need to have a look at that place on the outside. I'm going to bring it up onto my secondary screen up here. It's quite the place, isn't it? It is quite the place. I really like it, actually. Just take a look at it. I recommend going and having a little look at that link if you haven't done already. It's pretty dang cool. Next up is Mark, who says, evening all. Grouping McFisto, indeed. Been looking through the Kalegen section of Discord, and it's looking really interesting, shaping up great. I think it is as well. And if you haven't been looking at what we're doing over on Discord, I recommend going and have a little check. Martin and Yalab have been building up all of the different locations that we've been mentioning in the streams. And we're about to go through them all. I've been holding off a bit because I've been doing so much preparation for the Enemy Within stream that we're doing. Well, I'll tell you, I'll probably be telling you the date within like a day or two if tomorrow goes really well when we do our test recordings. So yeah, I've been somewhat busy on that, but the second that we've got that all nailed down and we're pulling the trigger and we're going and jumping back into the Kalegen side, we're going to be building up a write-up for every single one of those locations and dropping them over onto World Anvil. Hugely recommend you do a quick Google search for World Anvil if you don't know what it is. That's the platform we're going to be using to put our maps, to put our... It's basically a gigantic database for GMs and storytellers to world build. And it's just freaking awesome. Recommend it massively. Worth a look. We've already started writing some bits in there. We have the demographics for the Reikland up there, for example. Anyway, moving on. Legio Victor, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Love you and your work, Andy. Oh, thank you so much, Legio. That's a lovely thing to say. I hope that you stay through the course of this stream and drop some cool ideas as we go. We are building, as we mentioned already, the Palace for House Holzkrug here in Kalegen. It's going to be awesome. Nico then adds, could you tell me more about the Holzkrug family members? Also, in Cubicle 7 lore, the family lost all their land they had north of Grunberg. Why is your lore different? Is it based on any book? Thank you. It's based on... so the extra material that was added to the Holzkrugs was added afterwards. They were never from Grunberg beforehand. They were emperors in Reikland. They ruled the princedom of Altdorf. They had nothing to do with Grunberg at all. So this was a new addition that they added on top. And that can be, I think, accommodated somehow. And imagine when we drill out and work through the House Holzkrug details, we can do that. But previously, Holzkrug had been here. They've been in this particular part of land for a very long time, in the same way that, say, the Adenauers used to rule the land that's now got Castle Reikland in it, land that's now very much under the Emperor's control. Or alternatively, the Jungfreuds held the lands around Ubersreich. Yeah, so Grunberg has been held by, who is it? It's the Wallensteins, I think, that have held Grunberg for ages, and really quite a long time over there. Now, the Holzkrugs aren't a small family. Don't think of them like, say, the Jungfreuds even. The Jungfreuds are an enormously important family, but they're still nothing in comparison to the Holzkrugs. Holzkrugs are about as close as you can get to an imperial family without actually being one these days. There are few families that are as important, but most of their glory was held in the days before Magnus. And since Magnus's time, they have very much been on the eclipse, particularly because Magnus pretty much overruled them in a variety of things. They lost the princedom of Reikland, they lost a variety of other things because of the events that I presume will be covered in the Old World. But it's quite something else I think is relatively important to add, that Warhammer the Old World is almost certain to overwrite the Holzkrugs again. They probably won't be the emperors, or at least the electoral emperors, if you're looking at the different the Wolf Emperors of Mindenheim, the Ottilian Emperors of Talabheim, the Electoral Emperors of Reikland. If you're looking at the different petty imperial states that built up during the Dark Ages before Magnus pulled them all together. So they'll probably be overwritten again. So why is my lore different? Because Games Workshop and those who write for it are inconsistent and don't check everything. Is it based on any book? Yeah, I can't recall which one, but the Holzkrug emperors have been mentioned in at least 4 or 5 books. They've been around for a while. And their land over here with Kalegen has been a part of the canon for, again, quite a while. I can't remember where it was first mentioned. I might come back to you on that one. So why is it different? Because I've not really incorporated the pieces from that. What we'll do is we'll almost certainly make that another branch of the Holzkrug line. We'll resolve it relatively easily. For those who missed the link to Prague Castle, that's it popping up there. Alexander drops in and says, good evening, Mr. Oh, good evening, Alexander. And the chat. Welcome, Alexander. I found my way here after your recent appearance in Sotek's podcast. Oh, marvelous. That was a great one. Does anyone know if the video's back up yet? Yeah, YouTube pulled that one off for a variety of weird arcane reasons. But it's apparently going back up again because I spoke to the Lord Master Sotek and said, yep, popping back up very soon. I'm glad I did so, though I can't stay. I do enjoy the stream, folks. I'm delighted to see you, even if it's for a very short period of time. Do come back and watch it later. And if you ever do have any other ideas, for example, if you watch the stream at a later date, or indeed if anyone else does, just drop a comment into the comments here. Even if it's a year later, drop a comment in. Or alternatively, head over into our Discord. There's a link for that already down in the stream's description, so you should be able to dive straight into our Discord if you wish to do so, and drop in there and just make any comments about things you think we should add. This will be a never-ending project, I imagine, and that doesn't mean that we won't have a finite end. We will, but that doesn't mean that we won't be getting new ideas and people reimagining Kalegen in different ways, because much like Games Workshop will almost certainly reimagine the lore each time, so will we. It's pretty much what happens. Everyone's going to have their own version of Kalegen for those of you out there who decide to use this location. And your version of the way you present it to your players will almost certainly be different to how I present it to my players, because your empire might be smaller, it might be bigger, it might be busier, it might be less busy. So, yeah. More ideas. Alexander, enjoy. I will. Esty drops in and says, 2 enormous towers flanking the entrance, beautifully ornate, used by the palace guard as their barracks. The palace guards wear beautiful but somewhat unwieldy equipment. Liking it so far. Heron drops in a quick evening. Evening, Heron. Delighted to see you made it. Oxcutor then adds, could the gardens have some kind of new sport like tennis, bowls, croquet, or even a golf course? I don't think we're going to have space for equivalent to golf, although I'm not entirely sure if I want to have a Warhammer golf game yet, because golf is so intrinsically linked with its relatively Scottish roots, and I would rather, if I was going to do that, introduce it somewhere that reflected that a bit more closely, because Warhammer tends to do that. Something like a tennis or bowls or croquet equivalent, absolutely. Rename it with some sort, I mean, a sport that involves swinging hammers, damn straight they're going to have some equivalent of croquet. So I think that, yeah, the gardens will probably have space for that somewhere. We're going to have a certain amount of space, but not a lot if we're going for a large palace. let's see how it all goes once we start the buildings going into place. Scooter then adds something the rabble don't play, absolutely, because, you know, the upper classes need to be playing their own sport. Anyone who watched the most recent episode of The Mandalorian might have some ideas as to how that might manifest, maybe perhaps with less Lizzo. Alexander then adds, maybe have the castle also ready to house the administration needed for running the empire once the day comes. Interesting. So also the practical facilities are oversized, goes well with the throne thing. Find that interesting. I think that they probably already have offices back in their core lands, which are higher up in the mountains. But they're old and they'd be useless. Would they build some bits? Yeah, I think more importantly, we need to consider what would be repurposed. Kalegen, Halskrug has one job that's super important, and that's that he runs the Black Chamber. For Reikland. Now, the Black Chamber for Reikland, go check up the French Black Chamber if you want to see an equivalent from history. But the Black Chamber for Reikland is basically the Reikland spies. And Halskrug is the spy master for the Reikland. That's it. And given he's in Altdorf, he's almost a spy master to a degree for far beyond that as well. Assuming that I'm going through where he is, which means we need to have some equivalent of a Black Chamber, most of which is going to probably be held over in Altdorf, but they're going to have offices here. We're going to have some sort of, center of spies that we probably want to include in here. So any sort of NPCs for that might be a cool thing. Nico adds a shadow cabinet waiting in a secret shadow room cabinet. So this is interesting. So if we're doing that, we have to be aware that this doesn't happen in isolation. To do that, they need allies, which means that they need influential people from the empire. Now, if it's just a shitty shadow cabinet, so to speak, as in it's a bunch of nobodies aping some form of control, supping wine, thinking of a great tomorrow that's never going to come, then that's one style. But if we're looking for someone who is actually attempting to wrest control from Karl Franz in a moment of weakness, which the Enemy Within campaign absolutely shows. So if that's the case, then a shadow cabinet in waiting actually means certain bloodlines, and it's going to change over the course of how you present your Enemy Within. You're going to be looking almost certainly at the Jungfrauds. You're going to be looking at the Trotts from Tame. You're probably going to be looking at the Drakenbergs. The Drakenbergs with Constantin von Drakenberg, an enormously influential figure who's currently on the out. Used to be a more influential figure back during the time of Karl Franz's father, but he was replaced, and as were large chunks of that court, as Karl Franz brought in his buddies. So you get your Kurt Helborgs and et al., who are now taking control of sections of the Imperial, not just politics, but might as well. So yeah, I think you'll be looking at some pretty important key figures, but they're so important that it's and also busy that it's unlikely that they are going to be there. So they're going to have representatives. So possibly we're looking at having some form of representation here for House Jungfraud, maybe for House von Drakenberg, maybe for... Yeah, I think the Trotts might have someone here as well. The Trotts are a horrible family, so they might be quite interesting. I'm looking through the other families of the Empire. None of them really have enough backbone to really come forward, or they're too closely associated with, say, the Emperor. Go to Gorland, for example, where House Gorman comes from. Thyrus Gorman, the Supreme Patriarch of the 8 Colleges of Magic. Gorland, which... dates all the way back to like a land of gore, well, back to tribal times, with our big red-headed, crazy Unbergen tribesmen that eventually one day, many thousands of years later, would create Thyrus Gorman. Yeah, they're completely in support of the Emperor, as are many of the Reikland lines. So there's not too many lines we need to worry about to potentially bring forward. So I think there's definitely something in that. Here and then drop, never make an ornate and expensive glass ceiling you don't want smashed. Totally. 100% behind that one. Yalab then goes, I haven't been building crap, to be honest. Those days Martins has taken over, even taking notes of ideas from the stream. All credit should go to them and other who started to chip in Discord. Oh yeah, but you've still done an awful lot of work, Yalab. Let's not denigrate that. Esty then drops in. If he plays tennis, one of the buildings should be one of those late medieval indoor tennis courts. Of course, the fanciest possible version of it. So as an idea, kick around in the background amongst you all. Have a wee thought for a different version of tennis. I'd like a different sport. In the same way that we don't have football and we have midden ball, I'd like something else, something Warhammery, something that really speaks to the nobility, something that speaks to how they express and how they present in Warhammer in comparison to the real world, and what they would be wanting to show. What is the racket corresponding to? What sort of tales come hand in hand with it? Is there myths? Is there something else? Midden Ball, for example, in my world, has got myths that go back over 2,500 years and was actually a sport that was introduced externally by the elves from the Lore. And was completely different to what is currently played. It has changed significantly over the course of time, and to a point fallen out of favor and then come back and risen as a completely different sport. But yeah, we want to make it as Warhammery as possible. So have a wee think about how that could present. It's not going to make a huge difference on the map, but in terms of the write-up, it will make an enormous difference. Martin then goes, yep, own version of Kalegen, already shipped out the Elven ambassadors and replaced them with dwarves. As we say, everyone's going to be playing their own version. And indeed, that's what the whole point of Lawhammer is, if you want to sum it up, really. Lawhammer is my version of Warhammer that I'm going to be using in the Enemy Within. The Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay core book specifically tells you to ignore every rule you don't like, to ignore any setting material you don't like, because we all play in our own version of Warhammer. And Lawhammer is my version of Warhammer. Martin Ironroot Hammer, is his version of Lawhammer. And that, Warhammer. And that's cool. This great diversity of material that we share online ends up building up, if anything, a far richer, far more detailed setting that we can all take the bits of that we like. Particularly because we all have so many different versions of what Warhammer should look like in our heads. Some people only use, say, Total War Warhammer. Which is a very different view to, say, for example, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition. They could hardly be more different if they tried, but they are both legitimately Warhammer. So Lawhammer is just one expression of the greater whole, so to speak. Heron then adds, croquet sounds good. I agree. He could have spent a small fortune leveling what was once a beautiful garden. There was no beautiful gardens here, I think. Everything here is going to be planned. There is nothing, the attention to detail in this particular part of the city will be high. He will we want it to reflect his character. And Halskrug is a planner. Halskrug is a conniver, a manipulator, and I want that to be reflected in this area, which means he will have planned it out meticulously. He will have thought about each thing and what it's there for, ranging from ensuring there's places for salacious asides, shall we say, or alternatively salons for the educated and the literati, so to speak, and the glitterati rather than the literati or the illiterati, depending on which nobles you're dealing with, also need different places to gather. All of them will be spied upon. This is a place that's almost certainly going to have secret corridors. It's going to have nooks and crannies and places that make grey wizards get giddy with excitement. Ulgu, the grey wind of magic in Warhammer, is attracted to political intrigue and the backstabbing back corridor nonsense that this place will be pretty much reserved for. That being the case, as we've mentioned more than once, there's going to be multiple grey wizards in this city, several of which may be advising Halskrug himself. So, yeah. Yeah, then adds, I chucked other suggestions for something the palace here could be. A palace castle in, I am not going to pronounce somebody else's language's castle. This is going to be Baranov, Sadomirsky. I don't know how to say that, Sandomirsky. Anyway, I'm going to go take a quick look at that as well, if that's sitting over in Discord. Although, there's some really lovely pictures. Recommend click the link to Discord inside the description for this video and go take a look if you haven't already, because this place looks pretty damn cool. Smaller than I'm going to go for, but pretty damn cool. At least it looks smaller on the outside. I'm probably thinking more, I don't know. I mean, how big are we going to go? I'm going to have to bring up the scale so I can have a look. But I mean, we could really go very large, maybe even as large as the Prague Castle suggested, or maybe Versailles or something similar. A building that's truly freaking enormous. I'm really quite liking the idea of it. Anyway, Yellow then adds, not really a castle, as we have defensive structure for the town elsewhere. And this is pretty recent as primary impressive residents, most important guest events. And I definitely think that's the sort of thing that we're looking for in terms of tone. Martin then adds terrace gardens, artificial stacks for layers with mirrors or magic. You get an MC Escher effect. So to try and make most use of the garden area by clever use of blocking sight and revealing sight, so you get vistas and vistas removed as you go through tighter areas. That might be a good idea. And that speaks to gardeners that have been hired to do a particular job to try and make this space look bigger than it is, or to try and make sure that this space is best utilized. Definitely something in that. Are there more spy networks in the Empire and the Black Chamber and the Grey Guardians? Yeah. I think I've heard the Emperor's Ears, possibly in reference to Flan's Loner on that one. Yeah, there's various versions of spies that have popped up, including some rather dodgy commissions that have been mentioned in one places that go a little bit CIA in how they present themselves. And yes, there are a variety. I think they need to be rationalized for your own game executor according to your own preferences. For example, in my game, and this is very much my game, this is not anything that I've written for the official setting, although if I ever did, it would probably mirror it to a degree. But in my game, each one of the provinces has its own effective black chamber, although they are more or less impressive depending on the province at hand. Surprisingly more impressive than you might expect, Boris Torbringers. Really, really rubbish. We're going to the Von Tasniks over in Ostland. Probably the most impressive of all is Null, at least in mine. There's an advisor that's dropped in as a quotation, I think, in maybe it's the priest career, maybe not, can't remember. Politics advisor, I think it's an advisor, Kramond. And Kramond Kramovich is one of the political characters that I'm going to be using in my campaign. And yeah, he makes Holzkrug look simple in terms of how he presents, although he definitely doesn't make, say, for example, the Emperor's brother look simple. And he's someone that we definitely need to discuss at some point in some stream, because he is enormously important to how I'll be presenting my version of the campaign. The Emperor's brother is a grey wizard, and he's also someone who was well trained to be Emperor. Arguably was supposed to be Emperor. No, arguable. He was. He's his older brother. But because he had magic, he couldn't be. And that's a character and a half. Hyper intelligent, super smart. Everything that people say that Karl Franz is in the legends. You know, potentially the greatest statesman that could ever be. But you just can't trust the man because he's a grey. Anyway, moving on. Heron then says a shadow cabinet would need religious backing as well. Perhaps an ambitious arch-lector. That is enormously unlikely. Enormously unlikely. Particularly given the arch-lectors that we have, both in terms of the very canonical versions of them, who are still supporting the Emperor pretty much to the nubbin. I don't think the Sigmarites, given the way Sigmar has gone over the course of the last decade to 2 decades, and just how much they now support the Emperor, I can't see that any archlector of Sigmar would consider backing Holzkrug at all, unless maybe there was something like a mutant edict or something like that. Now then, you might get yourself some rather disgruntled Sigmarites suddenly looking around for an alternative. Now, this is something that I really feel should have been covered in the Enemy Within campaign and wasn't. There's probably a reason for that. I had all the material set up and organized for that. The Sigmarite responses, the Ulrican responses, the crazy stuff that the Emperor is doing and why. I was the one that was putting all of that material together. Graham and I were sharing writing tasks. Graham did all the original adventure. I did all the updates, all the new bits, all the extras to tie it all together. But I left the job before any of that material was passed over. So it was just never passed over. But we get an opportunity for our stream to potentially re-examine it and use that material that's still sitting in my head and just repurpose it according to our own needs. So in this particular case, I think that there won't be one in place, but I think during the course of play for the Enemy Within, or if you're already in the Enemy Within in your own campaign, take a look at what's already inside the Kalegen material we build and go, what happens when the Sigmarites come and say, you know what? Well, you might be a better option than what we currently have. But that's tantamount to heresy, because it is right down in the core edicts of Sigmarism that you support the Emperor and the Elector Counts. And Holzkrug is neither of those things. Here and then ads, I couldn't see our Ulrich barking anybody but Toddy. Absolutely. Our Ulrich, well, you say that. I mean, he won't back anyone but Middenheim or Middenland. Remember, we're in a different time where Middenland is an alternative option as well. And there is significant political tension between the Todbringers and the Valgiers, or if you have a different Ulrich, whoever is responsible for the cult of Ulrich, largely because the cult of Ulrich is currently still anchored to a host of political impositions. For example, they swear vows of celibacy, not for religious reasons, but for political ones, because they couldn't get access to the High Temple without them. But they made a vow. And if there's one thing that Ulrichans do, it's they keep their vows, normally. So our Ulrich has more than one option. The Karaberg has of late been largely a supporter of the Emperor, but that's not necessarily going to be the case if the Emperor goes a little bit, let's say, daft. Legio Victor ads, fancy dog show, obstacle courses, pastime, sports for nobles. I think stuff like this is a good idea. We're going to have a menagerie, which you can see up here, and it's reaching the point now where I'd like to start getting into the drawing side because we've been having a lot of chat here. But we're going to have a menagerie up here, which houses. That's not quite the right word. Cages, perhaps, which most certainly looks after the many diplomatic gifts that have been given to the Halskrugs, sometimes to the Emperor as well. Now, in my version of Castle Reikland, many of the crazier creatures that have been given to the Emperor, ranging from the almost expected, your Pegasi and similar from Betonia, for example. Here's a beautiful mare that's come from our best lines. We take this as a gift to represent our various diplomatic blah, 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 blahs. And then that gets hoisted off to Castle Reikland. Some of them go to the Imperial Zoo, but the Imperial Zoo is a far tighter area inside a city that's already too tight. The Imperial Zoo does have, however, a lot of stuff in there, including space for Deathclaw the Griffin. In my version of Castle Reikland, though, there's a relatively significant menagerie in the large estates that sit around Castle Reikland, where a lot of the diplomatic gifts are given. One of the biggest issues with a lot of the older material when they presented locations in Warhammer is that they didn't take account for what Warhammer would be. Funny that, because it didn't exist in its current form then. But as people translate the older versions of locations to a newer version, they often just repurpose what came before without any real thought. But where the Empire now is just different to what it was when it was written for first edition. And things like getting gifts of Pegasus from Betonia need to be accounted for. Rearing griffins needs to be accounted for. Hippogriffs needs to be accounted for. Where are they? Where do they go? How do they get housed? Do they get kennelled? Do they have stables? Do they have special aviaries for the various creatures that they've received? House Halskrug has got their version of that here. And there's going to be a lovely menagerie up there. Basically a zoo that is both to house all of their stuff and also to impress visiting dignitaries. Martin then adds, a racket has to be curved swan's neck with a sinew weave. Interesting. The game itself is a mix between squash, shots can be bounced off walls, and basketball. A number of hoops line the walls for extra points. That could be interesting. While you're thinking about that, Martin, see if you can actually turn that into something that feels like a sport in the background. I'm quite liking the idea of this so far. And lacrosse. So let's just really go well. It's used for catching and lobbing rather than outright swatting. Yeah, I quite like that too. Yeah. So we need a religious angle. If we're promoting Sigmarism, we need to think about teamwork. Sigmarism is all about defense and teamwork and working together. If we're thinking about a different cult, then we'll need to drill down on what that means. But I think a religious angle would make this a lot more fun because then you've got almost a myth that you can tie to it as to why it came about. And that could be a whole lot of fun. Executor ads. I was trying to think of a sport that had its roots in Warhammer battle skills and maybe a variant of polo. Yeah, polo. Wielding our hammers. Not a bad idea. Hockey, but with cavalry hammers. Yeah, totally. That'd be fucking awesome. Algo accumulates in the gardens, creating a perpetual mist in the hedge maze, creating a perfect location for undercover meetings. Oh, yeah. So we already have a relatively marshy area down in the south of the city. It might be good because we're definitely going to have water here somewhere. as you can see there with a sort of watery little sketch in place. I'm having somewhere where a mist can rise from and they can finger out between. Oh, I've been told I'm not allowed to say fingering out between things because you know, fingering things is not necessarily something you want to be discussing. But yes, as the mist, let's say, makes its way, drifts up and rises from the water and the reeds there. Yalab then adds, plopped one more link on Discord. Excellent. Another idea, slightly different. To different palace. It's also quite cool looking. I'm going to open that up. When I open that up, because I'm using the Discord app in the background at the moment, it's going to interrupt the picture that's on screen. Let me just bring that up. Holy crap, that's a nice looking place. Yeah, I like the look of that. It's got a lot of color to it as well. If anyone wants to go check that link, I'm just going to copy paste that over so that you can see it too. Control C as I bring that into the comment section. Go take a look at that. It's lovely. SD then adds 5 meter tall metal fence around the complex. I think at least possibly even a stone wall with a sort of tiering to it. So that you almost get a metaphor for most of the weight is at the top, all the power is at the top, and it's thin at the bottom. Each fence post is topped by swans. That I love. Made out of solid gold. That I don't, because it would be stolen. Tempting target for thieves, but who would dare take a chance? Tons of people would. I would instead twist that round and have them gilded or perhaps otherwise made to look like they're gold, and have rumors spread around that one of them is golden, the golden swan. Who can find it? Which means that people are constantly stealing things that aren't gold, because ultimately what you want to do is not give people access to that much gold, but beyond that, it's just not safe. You really want to get that sense of disappointment that runs through people attempting to take stuff from the nobles. It's always an exercise in futility. Power tends to accumulate power, and getting access to that is hard. It shouldn't be as easy as climbing up a wall and knocking off a swan. So climbing up a wall, knocking off a swan means that I imagine a whole bunch of them are broken, something that constantly pisses off whoever it is that's responsible for the grounds, because they're all attempting to find the rumored gold one, and there probably is no gold one. They're all chasing dreams that don't exist. A lovely metaphor for the general townsfolk across Kalegen as a whole. Heron then adds, I picture Stirlings to be a little hot fuzz, their black chamber. Yeah. It's hard to deny. Sweet Melancholy. Hello, Sweet Melancholy. Delighted to see you in the comments. Does the palace need its own small chapel? And to which god would it be? I think it needs multiples. We've discussed this in previous streams that Hallskrug is all about trying to appeal to as many of the nobles as possible. And he takes diplomats and ambassadors from across the world. So he obviously has the primary ones you'd expect, your Kislevites, your Tillians, your Estalians, probably some folk from Araby, Ulthuan almost certainly with the Azure. We're going to have some dwarves occasionally passing by as well from the great Karakankor. Possibly some other dwarf clans that are now naturalized into the empire, as much as they possibly can be as dwarves. So imperial dwarves, they'll be dropping in too. We'll probably be housing occasionally some halfling clans, important ones, maybe the Stouthearts, or alternatively one of their other important families, like the Thorn Cobbles, for example, a very important halfling family. So we're going to be getting folks of all sorts, and all of them need to have their gods represented to a degree. And that also includes people that you might not expect. For example, just a single example. In the game we're about to be streaming, one of our characters is the daughter of the Nipponese ambassador to Reikland. And that immediately says, well, do we need to have somewhere for them to pray? What does that require? Exactly how do they express their religious preferences? Now, to a degree, we've cheated for our version, because our character, Sage's character, who I don't think's been named anywhere, but she is actually a Ranaldin. So she's gone local, so to speak, when it comes to religion. But she hasn't, as will become clear, as we know the gods are somewhat more universal than that. I think multiple small chapels and possibly a pantheon is a good idea. So we can get ourselves a larger domed area, which is somewhere that people can worship any of the gods. So I think that definitely having some form of pantheon here makes sense as well. SD says if it's only one chapel, it would have to be Sigmar. It wouldn't have to be Sigmar. It probably should be, but it wouldn't have to be. I think in his ancestral lands, not the new build here, definitely would be. Here, though, because Sigmar has been so anti him, there could be a political statement being made so that this is maybe the only unfinished part of the palace, the Temple of Sigmar, that has yet to be organized, in many respects representing his political ambitions. When that temple is finished, he now has Sigmarite support, and he's now willing to push to become emperor. So possibly that's a better way of doing it than, and also allowing us to have our half-finished area. That might work. Obscure then adds, you just mentioned Karberg. Can't forget Karberg. That reminded me, I wanted to ask where the Reikland regiment, the Karberg Greatswords, are now based. Yes, see, this is just a nonsense. The Karberg Greatswords should have been a Middenland regiment, and they became a Reikland regiment, and they were still based in Karberg. This bugged me when they released, I think, on the most recent one was the heraldry book, where they said it's a Reikland unit. It was just, as far as I can tell, an error. But it's those happy accidents, those things that bug you, that turn into some of the more awesome stories. So for me, the Karberg Greatswords are now based in Altdorf. The Karberg Greatswords do not approve of... I might leave that one for the stream because it might come up. But yeah, it's very much a Lowhammer version of the Karberg Greatsword, so there's not a proper answer. But my answer is they're no longer based properly in Karberg, but sections of them are. I will also say that my version of the Knights Panther are massively different, because I have updated my Knights Panther to include all the detail that was added from the Crusade materials. I think Space McQuirk added a ton of extra stuff during White Dwarf articles in the past as well. I've incorporated all of that and also made it work with the existing potential supporter of the Tawbringers and exactly how that works. But yeah, good times. And then Heron, as we reached the bottom of the comments, finally says, if I remember my row right, still at Karberg, indeed. They just came to fame whilst Karberg was under Reikland rule, which is why they're associated with Reikland. Karberg under Reikland rule. Man. Man. Don't get me started as to the whole Dark Ages and what that does and why the Karberg Greatsword should be one thing or another. I have opinions on this one. Anyway, let's take a quick look at our palace area. The first thing I'm going to do is bring up our show grid. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up so that we can see approximately 100-yard block. That's about a 91 meter block or whatever. If we want it to be 100 meters, it's almost the same. It's not an enormous difference. That's basically, whoa, let's bring that back like so. Press the wrong buttons there. There is our, let me just bring that back too. 100-meter block. So the question is, how big is our palace? Are we going to go proper huge? Are we going to go, say, Versailles sized? And Versailles is not a small palace. Are we going to go a bit smaller? That Prague palace. Do we have any dimensions for that? If anyone's in the comments and has that up, because it looks super good as well. How big do we want to make our palace? If you've got any ideas on that, bring it up now. I originally had the palace sort of working around a square here, a square that was originally going to be an open area in front of the palace, with possibly the palace as almost an N shape all the way around it. I don't know if that's a good idea. If you've got any preferences for it, perhaps more a solid front instead to present a solid front, or do we want it to be a bit more welcoming, as in you move into the area and you're surrounded by buildings on both sides, perhaps with statues to various gods or saints or previous Halskrugs that are super important, emperors and similar. There's lots of things that we could potentially do here. If you have any preferences for what you think works, do drop it in. My biggest one is, how long should this castle be? So Alexander's already dropped in. It's 70,000 square meters. That could mean anything. Is that across the various tiers? Is that just at ground floor? What we need is actual dimensions from above. So I'd probably go check a map for how that looks. Versailles, for example, as I recall, how big is Versailles? I can't remember how big Versailles is. I looked it up once. But I haven't looked it up for a while. So I'm going to have a quick check and look online as we're discussing this. It's a good... Oh, Versailles is pretty big. It's pretty big. If we go from that end to that end, we're looking around about 150, 200 meters. So it's around about 200 meters long. It looks pretty freaking awesome. With its main buildings coming at the front and all the gardens largely at the back. That's pretty dang awesome. Alexander adds, likely with the gardens included, but it's also the largest castle complex in the world. Yeah, which makes it, I'm looking for the castle size because that's what I'm going to draw first. I think the end shape is more reflective of Kallegen's purpose as a diplomatic sector. I agree. So let's make it the end shape with possibly an extension to either side for wings, because you can't have a castle without at least 2 or 3 wings coming off it, and potentially some smaller inner courtyards inside those wings. Alexander adds, occupied an area of almost 70,000 square meters at about 570 meters in length. It's freaking huge. And an average of 130 meters wide. Now, if we did it that size here, we would be looking at a castle that was 1, 2, 3, 4, about that big. How cool would that be? I don't think it's going to fit inside the land that we have, though. I think that possibly that would have been an awesome build. And there's a part of me that regrets not making space for something ridiculous like this. But I don't think we're going to do that. We're probably going to go about half the size in total, unless somebody thinks that I need to go bigger. And if you do, how do you think we should incorporate that? Happy to be guided by your preferences out there. Would the Carberg Greatswords based in Altdorf have considered moving to Kalegen, as it's a large town right in the Midland border or closer to Carberg? No, so in my version of Warhammer, the Carberg Greatswords are currently underneath the command of the Reichsmarshal. And the Reichsmarshal chooses where they go, not others. They've got barracks in Carberg, and they are a controversial unit because of this. Because they... how can we best put it? Consider it like an American base in Germany or in the UK, in that there are troops from someone else for diplomatic reasons that are inside your territory. And that's kind of how I use my Carberg Greatswords. I'm fully aware that's 100% my version of them, but I had to rationalize certain things for when I was last using them, and that was the answer that made most sense then. You might find that when I settle down and organize everything for the Lawhammer streams, I might present a slightly different version of them. Scooter adds, but perhaps their commander doesn't get on with the Halskrugs. I think that's also potentially the case for definitely the case for our Carberg Greatswords, because our Carberg Greatswords are as a regiment underneath state army control of Reikland. Right, so we got quite a big place to fit in here. I'm going to start with a loose shape. And if people think it should be bigger or there should be more involved with it, do tell me. I'm going to move into the space that I had originally marked out and start it about, I think, maybe about here. So going across. So I'm going to get a smaller brush, and much like I have been for all of my previous mapping, I'm not going to worry too much about my lines being perfectly straight. Let's start off with, how wide do I want to start off with? I want to start off with approximately 100, maybe go 100 yards across. That's pretty wide. My eraser isn't switched on properly. So that would be approximately 100. Why is my... I didn't put the percentage up. There we go. 100 doesn't seem bad to me for the main section. And if we move it down to about there, we can get our main building area, possibly spilling out at the front. Do we want it to be equal on both sides? No, I want to add character to each one of the wings, so we can have some core shapes in place. The front, what we're going to do with the front, I think we want to have ourselves a main building area, and then probably connect it with a couple of small. So if I have a small courtyard at either side, we can work the buildings around those. Oh no, I've gone on the inside. What am I doing? Let me just move those on the other side. Too busy thinking about what it could look like to actually pay attention to what I'm drawing. That should be on the inside. And let's just quickly move that as well over to the other side, because that's meant to be like so. There we go. So let's pull that one in. Go down to about there. Let's see how close we're getting to the walls with that. We're getting very close to the wall. So we may need to either A, change where we're going to put our gardens. B, change where we're going to put the wall. I'm not going to change where we're going to put the wall. This is truly enormous. Look at the size of the place. Quite like it though. So what we could do is we could have the gardens bound by the wings. So if we have ourselves two wings that spread off from it. So if we're looking at it from the front, you'll get, yeah, so it'll be sort of maybe that sort of, let's get rid of our middle class area here. I may actually just remove that middle class area entirely. I may not. I may have a very tight, small area there. So I'm thinking, again, don't worry too much about my lines being straight at the moment. I'm just sort of sketching out how much space we're going to take up with this. And then maybe have a couple of inner courtyards there as well. And then we do something similar on the other side. I'm pretty sure it's not going to mirror it. So we can have a larger section going off to a isolated, separate, smaller section. Yeah, okay. Which means that that here will be all gardens, loosely. This here will be all gardens, leading into a large open area at the front, which will have its own separate buildings overlooking it, leading down to walls. How big do our walls want to be? Do we want to just have it like big and open space leading into it? I think we do. I'm going to leave that open actually and move my road down slightly and widen it out so that we have a nice wide road that makes our way all the way across here and then tightens up as it moves towards there. Okay. Right. Private gardens at the back that are reserved for the family. Small chapel. Contemplation, tranquil area, possibly for those who are looking for a more manicured garden experience or wish to commune with nature, maybe a small wild area that's dedicated to Tal, and our city walls spreading out across the back. Okay, so as a general area, what do we all think? That's what I'm thinking for the palace. I know it's super loose, but that gives us a building that's approximately 200 meters wide on the frontage. That's pretty big, including both of its two wings. We've got a large. Do I want enough space at the back? I think I do. We have large gardens to either side. They're not that big. They're the equivalent of a couple of football parks to either side. So they're big enough to be relatively impressive, but not enormously huge. And yeah, I think this is not too bad for a space. Does anyone think that anything else should be included before I start going wild with detailing it? Or do we think we're big enough? If anyone's got any comments on that, bring them up. I'm going to start detailing just this section here as I start trying to figure out in my head exactly how it works. If you have any comments for how that could appear, do bring them up. For example, Heron suggests, it's a hefty lad. Yeah, it's a hefty lad. This is a building that is going to absolutely dominate this section of the city. It reminds me of when we were doing Reich and updating it. And I had a discussion concerning Blackrock Castle and exactly what I wanted to do with it. It was important that Blackrock was proper freaking huge to accurately represent both what Reich had been through and how it had been presented in a couple of the more Warhammer sized sources. So I went pretty big with that one. And you can see that if you take a look at the cover image that Sam did. Sam ended up not doing the castle big enough. I redrew parts of it, as did, as I recall, actually, as did JG, the Reich cover. Although I think Sam's the credited artist in that one. JG and I did sections of it as well to make sure it nailed down the way we needed it to be. So yeah, the Castle Blackrock ended up being pretty big, and I've got a feeling that the Hallscrew Palace here is going to be also a very sizable area. And I think it's important that we do that to show the difference again between our hubs and our have-nots. And I think that's going to be reflected again when we move up into the upper class area on the top of the hill. Now, our palace is at the base of the hill rather than up on the hill. And I think that is also something that we want to consider in terms of why that was chosen, what that means. Do the Hallscrews have secondary buildings further up on the hill? Do they not? There's potential things to discuss there. Anyway, I'm going to start drilling into this. I'm going to do just one building to begin with. And that just came up that Lord of Sotek was saying something. Did anyone check what that was? I have no idea. Oh, he's just messaging me in Discord. The video has been restored. Hey, if you want to go watch the video where I speak to Lord Master of Sotek, everything's back and up and running. I mentioned that earlier on the stream for those of you who've been here since the beginning. Some people arrived with us because of that stream. So we're going to have ourselves, I still can't draw straight. Let me just tidy that up a little bit. I'll add just this one building, which is one long potential, barracks potential, almost anything, sidey, palacey thing. I'm probably imagining actual stables, actually. Looks like it's a large stables area. Probably. Unless anyone's got an alternative for what that should be. Perhaps separate off the front with a large towered area. I'm almost tempted to go down in brush size for this. That can go there, and we can have ourselves a relatively impressive building making its way along. Now, when we're dealing with details on a map of this scale, there's little you can do to show statues or crenellations or pretty stuff. The more you add, the messier it looks at this sort of scale. So you're often better just doing some jiggly little lines, and the imagination fills in all the rest. A good description of it can go far further than actually attempting to accurately depict everything in a fashion. There we go. That'll probably do for a start. I'm pretty happy with what's beginning to build. We can work from that. Right, let's have a check if there's any comments to see if anyone says anything else. I would make the change of street with sudden, maybe a two-lane road with large trees. The middle or statues are both alternating. Yeah, I think that's actually a good idea. I think I'm going to make it relatively even. And I do think that having some sort of boulevardy tree thing moving up through the middle may be a really good idea. That could be quite a lot of fun. Martin adds, has the garden displaced the menagerie or includes it? Good point. We need our menagerie. I think our menagerie is probably sitting in this area. When we get there, we will turn this into our menagerie. Probably a mixture of this house, our garden space, and this wing will be doing something else. We've got to be careful about how that wing is used because there's going to be noises of various types. That's something to consider. Good point, Martin. Thanks for bringing it up. Heron then says it needs to have an overlay ornate swan lake on the grounds for sure. Yeah, it probably does. I agree. For those of you who don't know, the symbol of House Hallskrug is a swan, a crown swan, because they used to be emperors. It's not just that they used to be emperors, they used to be the elector counts. That's the real reason that it's crowned. You tend to find that a crown symbol is often used to show that you came from one of the royal lines. The royal lines in the empire are the elector count lines. They have a variety of different actual titles, but the elector count symbolism comes from Sigmar's day, when the word count was first, well, it wasn't really first coined, it developed over time, but it came from the old classical word comes, which eventually became the counts, his companions. Right, so what am I going to do with this building? I think I'm going to do something similar to what I've done with this one. Just make it a relatively ornate appearing building. I'm ignoring the water that I once said was going to go there. We're going to go again with multiple roofings in place. Okay, so I think that'll do for the moment. And let's bring on another section. Now, exactly what all these are used for, I've no idea yet. If you see a building and you think, hey, it looks like one of those, and you think it should be something, do bring it up in the comments, and we can mark that out on the Kalegen material. The obvious options are things like barracks and stables and offices and everything else that you're going to need for your imperial paraphernalia. But they've... Yeah, okay, that'll do. I'm just going to get rid of the little bit of blue there because it bugs me with the water sitting on... Where's my water layer? Completely lost it. I can't see for the sake of looking. There it is. Let me just get rid of that blue. There we go. And we'll just make it a part of the... In fact, no, that's going to be a road. So we'll make that bit here. There we go. Love it. Right, let's get back to our lines. Okay, so we're probably looking at an outer wall extending along here and making its way, because we've got our gardens all the way along this length. Should we have anything else in this wall? Do anything else with it? Do we actually have buildings against this wall? If you have any ideas for that, bring them up now. I'll just mark the walls line in and I'll pop... Oops, that went a little bit squint. That's because I can't see it because my hand's in the way. So I'll just do a loose line so we know loosely that that's going to be a wall. I'll drop something in the corner to suggest at least some form of building over there. Large back area. What details are on these, I'm unsure, but we're probably eventually going to move into some rather nice gardens. Okay, I'm going to quickly check the comments before I go to our next building. Hernad, it's silly, but I have a mental image of them giving the swan on the crest a little Galmaraz held, a little hammer held in their claws, hammer in one hand and something else in the other, perhaps, like the Imperial Eagle. That amuses me a little bit too, except they don't even have hands that go like flippers. That would look terrible. You've made me laugh at least. Yeah, to go with the crown. Yeah, totally. After all, Galmaraz was once held by his ancestors, currently held obviously by Karl Franz. So what exactly does that mean, eh? Yeah, hammer symbols are super common in Imperial iconography though. Right, so we've got ourselves our next building that I'm going to drop in. I might want to build it into this area actually. I'm going to drop an extra section to this building at the back. We also have to consider the tower, because we're going to need a tower for our heir to live in. On that, we have a small discussion to have concerning the extant Halskrugs and who we have here. My Halskrugs are very much going to be going with the classical version of them. That may contradict the current book that says that they come, for example, from Grunberg and its surrounding area. But I'm not going to be doing that. They're going to be very much the Imperial line they always were. Used to live in Altdorf as well, because that was their capital. Altdorf used to be their city. And our current family line includes Leitmund Halskrug, his daughter, and his heir. And if you follow our previous streams, you'll know that our daughter and heir has a bit of a problem. Halskrug has no surviving children other than her. And that means she has to inherit. Unfortunately, though, for those of you who follow streams, legally, she shouldn't. But they are taking efforts to ensure that no one notices that, because we don't want our Halskrugs to lose their lands, after all, after such a long time. Leitmund has a wife. Potentially a mother who's still alive. And I think that's about as much as we've detailed so far. I have several other family members that span back to when the Halskrugs were emperors, and I've got their family line. They're also related indeed to Karl Franz. No great surprise though. Karl Franz is from a significantly lesser bloodline in general, the Holzwig-Schliessens, half of which had the money, the other half of which had the older blood. Combination of two households, both alike in dignity. Okay, so we're definitely beginning to build some shapes here that are making some form of sense to me. I'm imagining our larger buildings. I've got another wing coming in here and figuring out what I want to do with this one. I'm not entirely sure what I want to do with this one. Anyway, I'll have a quick check at our comments. Oh, we've got a few coming in. Alexander says, there was an event called Erfurter Latrinensturz. I have no idea how to pronounce that. It happened in 1184 during the assembly of the emperor with a lot of important nobles. I would love to have something like that as a possible plot hook for Kalegen. For that, we would need indoor latrines. Oh, I think we definitely have those. I need more details on indoor latrines. Loving this. What happened during this great event? The Erfurter Latrinensturz. It doesn't sound good. Legio Victor drops in and says, this is my first time watching the stream, so forgive me, but are you also planning on doing a layer underneath the city for sewers, dungeons, mischievous cults, Sigmar, escaping purposes? This is worth covering. Now, this town is super new. It's been built within the last 50 to 70 years, and it does not have a sewer system yet. So we're not going to be doing a sewer map, unlike what we do with almost every other city of the empire. This place has yet to have a full set of sewage put in place. The palace has got its own ways of getting rid of the effluvium, as do the upper class buildings, but most of the lower classes are still dwelling in their filth. Yay! And that has been accommodated for down in the south of the city to a degree. There's a bunch of bone pickers and gong farmers and various other rag and bone style folk who gather a lot of that crap, and they sell on parts of it, they dispose other parts of it, and there's a big pile of the worst of it sitting down in the south of the city. So we won't be doing those, but we do have a variety of mischievous cults and Skaven attempts at infiltration already building for the city. We've got a rather nasty Nurgle cult moving with the nobles. We have yet to dial down on a nice Slaneshi cult. We might want to have a little think about that. We've got some other Nurgle influence up in the State Army barracks in the south. The Skaven are creeping in a variety of places, including just down the south over here, where they're actually underground over here. So yeah, the Skaven are in town. They just don't have a sewer system to infiltrate through. And this place isn't connected to their underground network of tunnels, so they have been doing everything that they can to effectively influence the place overground, which gives it a unique political, a unique use really as the GM for the GM, who needs to try and figure out how their Skaven are going to infiltrate using more traditional methods. It's altogether far too easy to just go, the Skaven just dropped down the sewer. They've escaped. Oh, you go chasing after them. Oh, poisoned wind. This is going to be a far tougher ask for the Skaven. It also means that if you want to play a Skaven party, this place makes for a fascinating place because you don't have all your normal networks that you can rely upon to hide. So you're going to have to come up with quite a different plan to sneak into the place. And yes, I do think Skaven parties can be an awful lot of fun. Alexander then drops on and says, possible plot hook for Kalegen. For that, we need indoor routines. We've already covered that one. Pardon me. Oxecutor then says, I have to drop off. We'll catch up later. It was lovely having you while you were here, Oxecutor. Nico then adds, can anyone tell me which stream Andy was talking about the Hallskrug daughter? I mentioned that one earlier on. You're looking for the stream where I was mapping. I shall show you the part of the town I was mapping. This part here. So find this part of town as it's appearing. I think that's like stream 2 or 3. It's pretty early. And it's when we were deciding what this statue was all about that we go into it in some depth. That's where you need to go find that one. Martin confirms it is indeed one of the early ones. Esty then goes, the city is too few and new for Skaven to have undermined it. There's no sewer system beyond the pipes for individual rich houses. That's exactly the case. Heron then adds the potential alive mother was going to be a stallion. That's correct. And quite involved with the stallion sector, Mamidia, and was clashing with the local garrison captain. If I recall, yes, that is all correct. Indeed, I think that because of that influence, we have to make sure we have a relatively impressive temple to Mamidia inside the palace grounds. Myrmidia is, in terms of the old world, a far bigger and more influential cult than the cult of Sigmar. For all Sigmar, because the Empire was the primary setting of old Warhammer, no matter what people try to pretend, because Sigmar became so prevalent, lots of people tend to think that Sigmar is the most important god of the Empire and the Old World and beyond. And that's just simply not the case. Myrmidia's cult is enormous by comparison. All of Astalia and all of Tilia view Myrmidia as their primary patron deity. And all of Astalia plus all of Atilia are bigger than all of the Empire. Plus, Myrmidia has spread out from there to encompass most of the border princes, good chunks of the Empire, parts of Bretonnia, where the worship of the Lady instead is the primary deity, and other parts of the world as well. So, yeah, the cult of Myrmidia is big. And I think that we need to make sure that that's reflected here. We can have ourselves a small unit of Templars that work out of the temple there. Go check the Tome of Salvation 2nd edition for how the Templars are organized for the cult of Myrmidia. They go into a bit of depth there. I say they. It was me. I wrote that section. So, yeah, know the cult of Myrmidia really, really well. So I think dropping in a good temple, perhaps with a couple of fighting squares, would be a good idea, but there's not a lot of space for that here. So I think what I'll do is I'll have the Templar Myrmidia facing into the palace over on this side, because I think that'll be a good idea. So I'm going to pop it here instead. And that'll do. That'll be where that goes. That pretty much solves that potential issue. Love it. Alexander Gold, link is in the Discord. Excellent. That's the link for the video, is it? To make it short, over 60 important nobles of the Empire drowned in the latrine cesspit. Oh, that part. Oh, that. There. Oh, I like that. See, there's several key moments in the history of the Empire that are often forgotten. And one of them is, for example, when Drachenfels invites the Emperor and all of the most important nobles of the Reikland and some beyond, and poisons them, and they all die. The impact that that makes on the Imperial lines is enormous. Some of them die that day because of what Drachenfels did. But one of the reasons why that's often forgotten as a setup is because it's a novel, and novels were often ignored by the studio. Particularly because a lot of the novels played very hard and loose with the established canon, meaning that some novels introduce some concepts that probably shouldn't have been introduced. Some novels go really out there in terms of how they present, say, the colleges of magic, or how they present magic at all, how they present some of the species, and they're just weird. And they don't match the army lists or the established canon that is being built up elsewhere. Fine for the individual stories, but if you're trying to accommodate all of the various types of Warhammer that's out there, they cause a lot of problems. And the same can be said for quite a few of the roleplay books. Several of the roleplay books are absolutely spot on perfect, but some of them are weird and have some really weird details. Like, for example, in Karakazgul, they make reference to real world weekdays, like Saturday. This happens every Saturday. What the flying frick is that? That makes no sense at all. So, as people who are attempting to gather all the lore, make sense of all, people like myself, it does make it very difficult to decide what you should and what you shouldn't pay attention to. And ultimately, if you're looking for where to base your empire off of, start with the army lists and start with the studio's output, and then work from there. The role-playing game is generally perceived to be very good, but not always. It makes some pretty weird choices in places. And also, the battle game has overwritten several sections of the roleplay game over the course of time, meaning that some primary sources in first edition and second edition quickly became secondary sources. And in, say, Karakazgul's case, and to a degree, Bretonia's case as well, because the version of Bretonia that was presented in Knights of the Grail was not perceived to necessarily be as good as they might have wished it to have been. Which is a shame, because David, who wrote it, is awesome. So let's add ourselves another building here. Go for another style of roof for this one. Maybe have that go towards a central point, like so. We can add a couple of little details to that. Again, as I mentioned before, we've got to be really careful about adding too many details to these things, because it starts looking messy and it becomes difficult to scan. And and this is being done for us after all, so we want it to be easy for us to read. Real world maps often require something like a Google overlay to make sense of them. We're not going to have a Google overlay. We're just going to have what we have here. So we got to make sure that whatever it is that we do works. Let me just check the remainder of the comments before I go on to the next bit. Heron says, that's got to have been referenced in the lore somewhere. It wouldn't surprise me if it hadn't been. You tend to find that the majority of the writers that have been working in Warhammer tend to reference British history, because most of them are English speakers, and they're English speakers primarily. So they reference events that they're aware of. So British history, sometimes Irish, sometimes Scottish, often Scottish actually, but most commonly English history, with a smattering of bits from France and Germany and elsewhere, but mostly English. If you mean the Latinisters, it's a real life. Yes, I'm fully aware of that. You're asking about, yeah, you're speaking to each other. Apologizes. Heron says, yes, I know. I just meant I'd be shocked if it wasn't a Warhammer version of it already. It's just so Warhammer. It totally is, which is why we need to use it. So you and Lore Master Sotek interview. Lovely to hear that, Nicotiniac. Oh, so many different ways I can pronounce that. It's exciting. If you want to confirm the pronunciation, feel free to do so. Just want to say you're awesome. Oh, that's really nice of you to say so. Oh, I'm feeling all nice and touched now. Sweet Melancholy drops in and says, those mapping streams are the best thing I've ever encountered. Love them so much. Oh, if only I could travel in the future and see what marvel you would do to Castle Wittgenstein. Oh, I love castles. I'm still a little bit disappointed I didn't get to do the map for Castle Wittgenstein, because I'd set myself aside time to do the upgrade for it, because I've mapped the place for my own games about 15 times. I've played the Enemy Within campaign so many times it's almost embarrassing. So I was super excited to finally get an opportunity to drill into the place and update the original map. But yeah, sadly, I left the job as producer of Warhammer before I got to do that. Although it's not the one I'm most disappointed by. The one I'm most disappointed by is Altdorf, by quite an enormous measure. I really wanted to do the map for that, because all of the existing maps that we've had for Altdorf so far just haven't matched what has been written into the setting. And sadly, the most current version of the map makes all the same mistakes that the previous ones did. And it makes me a sad bunny. I had a big, long discussion with Games Workshop about Altdorf and how I wanted to present it. And I'd had complete approval of everything that I was going to do. And it was going to look completely different to any map that had come before. It was going to use all the previous maps as inspiration, but they were going to be perceived as almost like a medieval cartographer's version of it, i.e. a load of rubbish. And the map that I was going to produce for the Altdorf book was going to be this is what it would look like if it was a real place, and oh my goodness, it's huge. Sadly, I didn't get to do that. I am still a bit gutted by that one. Of all the maps that I didn't do officially, that's the one that upsets me most, because it's the one I wanted to do most. It's been a bugbear of mine for, I don't know, back when Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2 was a thing. And the Altdorf map came out for that, for Spires of Altdorf. That is what kicked me off with, that's not quite true. The map that was inside, Sigmar's Heirs map was one that truly kicked me off. That was the one that I ended up going to Black Library and saying, this is a nonsense. You need to get your maps together. This massively contradicts everything that came before. Here. And if you haven't done that on purpose, we have a problem. They hadn't done it on purpose, and there was a problem, which is one of the reasons why I started building the big master map in the background that I have of all the Empire. I brought up the Altdorf issues after the release of Spires of Altdorf, because I wasn't doing the cartography then. I said, this is fundamentally broken. There's all manner of things that have been described as being a part of Altdorf that just aren't here, and they're part of the current version of Warhammer. You're now contradicting Warhammer 8th edition, and I don't think that's your intent or your purpose. So perhaps we do something about that. At the very least, the Reichsport was missing. The Reichsport is an enormous expanse of water that can hold the entirety of the Imperial First Fleet. So we're talking an entire, a massive fleet of warships can sit inside there and anchor. The water is that deep, the water is that wide, and it's right on Altdorf. Altdorf, and the Reichsport is part of Altdorf and extends upwards along the River Reich after the confluences of the Talabek and the Reich up towards the top left of the map if you were doing it as a map aligned to north. Yet all the maps just sort of forget about the Reichsport. It was added to the glorious Reikland map, but that's because I did the glorious Reikland map. So, yeah, there's a lot of maps that I wish I'd done that I hadn't done. Meh, such is life. And the alternate Altdorf map, there's multiple Altdorf maps, it's worth saying, out there, but they all make largely the same mistakes. Love Knights of the Grail, an absolutely excellent book and creates a really interesting Bretonia. See, Knights of the Grail is a funny one. Some people love it, some people hate it. I really wish they'd put rules in for the bloody Grail damsels. I mean, seriously. And indeed, they should have had rules for absolutely everything, but it was sadly not there. You'd have to pronounce it with a Polish accent. Sadly, I do not have one of those. So that would be Nikotyniak. Nikotyniak? 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 How close am I? Legio Victad, so the Eshi cult that seduces women who are fighters, warriors, possibly from other cults, focusing on their sense of pride or vanity, plot to remove the traditionally male rulers and replace them with women. See, I have a slight issue here because what it does is it equates chaos worship with feminism, which is not something that I would particularly like to do because feminism is not a bad thing. Feminism is in general a really good thing. So if you're doing something like that, you generally need to make yourself, you generally need to have a pretty good angle or a pretty good take. Because Slaanesh is not necessarily about pride or vanity, but it's most certainly about excess. And there's a lack of excess here. If anything, this sounds more like a Tzeentch cult, because Tzeentch is about change, moving something from one thing to another, replacing one ideal with a different ideal. Slaanesh is much more about excess, about repeatedly doing something that you loved and growing bored of it and looking for the next thing to get that same thrill, and going way, way, way too far. A really easy reference would be something like Clive Barker's Cenobites or something similar as a good reference for something that potentially goes down a similar route to how Slaanesh often does. But if you're really wanting a Slaaneshi cult, I think I would rather go for one that was at its heart based upon excess, something going too far or being jaded, no longer gaining any excitement out of the thing that's sitting in front of you and looking towards a new horizon and desperately trying to get that fix, get that thing that lets you feel the way you felt before until you become just completely desensitized to everything. So if we're looking for a Slaaneshi cult, I think I would rather have something along those lines. I think that'd be quite nice. That all said, I like the idea in general. You just have to make sure that you use it well. I'm not sure, though, that if we really want to be going with a Slaaneshi cult, that we drop it just on seducing women. Martin then adds, there was talk of a young cannibals amongst the nobles. Maybe this hedonistic collection of gluttons could be linked to Slaanesh. I mean, they could be, but we've already got a slightly different version of where they're being connected to. I mean, yeah, perhaps, yeah. It's always the same things with Slaanesh. I'd really like, if we're doing something that feels unique and for this place, I'd like something a bit newer. Going away from the classic sex, gluttony, and sexuality. I am in general a sex positive type of chap. I try not to allow the demonization of sex to influence the stuff that I create, and it very much is an issue for many. Yeah, I'm not sure what would work best there. Nico then adds, did I cheat by just saying Nico instead of Nikotyniak? I totally did. Nikotyniak says, on the spot, actually, if you want a tiny bit harder Polish tongue twister, you dick. Okay, so that would be Grzegorz? I don't know how to do an E with what looks like a cedilla. Brizeb. Che, would that be a che? Che, ze, witch, wits. I can't pronounce any of this. Trzaz. Oh my goodness, I'm not Polish. Powiat, that's a dark L, isn't it? So sort of more of an that's another dark ale. Lodi. Oh, I shouldn't even try. So clearly, I am not Polish. I am very, very Scottish. Indeed, on that, as an amusing aside, I will be doing all manner of stupid accents when we do our live stream. And I apologize to anyone whose accent I absolutely mince, because I am terrible at it. I enjoy doing it, but I'm really bad at doing them. So be aware that that is almost certainly coming. You can laugh at my various attempts at accents. If you've read Enemy and Shadows, I wrote a piece in there about using different accents for the different regions of the empire and how you should choose accents that make sense to you where you come from. And I gave some examples of how you could select those accents. That came directly from my own game. I have done that for my game. My Middenland, for example, has got a very northern style accent. They're not really northern, as in they're not, from the north. They're very much my rendition of a northern accent, where Altdorf is very much tied closely to London for my accents, and our estuary accents for Reikland as a whole. And that will become very clear in our stream. What will also become clear is just how bad I am at doing all of those accents. But it's not going to stop me trying. I'm going to do it anyway. I do enjoy an accent. My Ostlanders, they've got a deeply Eastern European accent, let's say non-specified, so I don't need to call out any particular place. Our Ostermark has, if anything, an even crazier Eastern European accent. Obviously, our Sylvanian accents are really bad, dodgy vampire-style accents from various schlocky attempts to do a Romanian accent by different actors down through the course of time. After all, they all want to drink your blood. They have, that has to be Sylvania. But my version of Averland is much more Neepy Farmer from Cornwall. It's more of a Mummerset accent, really. A mixture of various other accents badly attempted by me. And I am actually terrible at loads of them. So it's going to be a fun stream. That much is certain. I'm looking forward to it. Right. Okay. So we've got some extra buildings moved in there. We're moving down towards the wing of the castle. I'll just run through the comments again. Nicotiniac says it's from a bit. If you Google it, there's no movie bit where the Germans try to pronounce it. Cool. Nice. Could we have an aesthetic hermit? An aesthetic hermit in the palace? What's your plans for that? I'm not quite sure what you're looking for. Nico says, stop that Kislev nonsense. Let's stay with reasonable Warhammer names like Sinars. There's a reason that some people don't like some of the older Warhammer names. But then again, I've been responsible for some pretty damn big stinkers too. And then adds maybe an aesthetic flagellant. Again, are we talking about in the grounds? If we are, what's your plan for that? How would it express? Why would he or she be there? Why haven't they been moved on? Or are they a part of the staff, part of the castle, part of something else? What are you thinking for that? Nicotinia then adds, actually, it's Ostland nonsense at Nico. It totally is. Completely different question and topic, and one that I've been dying to know. How are state troops regiments raised at the granular level, as in the manor, estate, village level, volunteer, conscript? And the answer is all of the above. One of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people make with the empire is assuming that it is the same everywhere. But it really, really, really isn't. Not only are each of the grand provinces different in terms of Reikland or Middenland, or if you're playing with the modern setting, Nordland, although if you're playing with the enemy within setting, Nordland is just a province, not a grand province. Your Hochland, also a province or a grand province. Ostermark, grand province or province, depending on which era you play in. They're all completely different. They all have completely different legal frameworks, and each of them have different mechanisms in place, not just to raise the state armies, but to deal with the nobles who raise the state armies on behalf of the elector counts at hand. The state army model, at least in my setup and in any writing that I've done in it, was put in place by Magnus the Pious. Magnus the Pious completely reorganized the empire, some 200 odd years ago. And he was the one who established the colleges of magic. He established the state army system, and he established a host of rights that the elector counts have over their peoples to call on soldiers in times of war. For example, when the Great Wars come and you need to get loads of soldiers, Magnus had to do that pretty much by hand, and he decided that he would never, ever go through that bollocks again, and basically almost new model armied it and built the state army system. And his state army system was implemented in different ways in different parts of the empire. So, to go through your questions, how are state trooper regiments raised at the granular level, as a manor, estate, village level, volunteer, or conscript? You come up with an answer, and there'll be a part of the empire that does it that way. So sadly, I can't give you a definitive answer, but that is very much how Warhammer is often presented, because that ensures that if Games Workshop come along later and they write themselves a new novel or write themselves a new situation, the Empire offers them the opportunity to do anything they want and still not contradict previous sources, as long as they say this is a unique version that only happens here. And that suddenly takes all the chains off of the imagination for the individual writers, something that Black Library in particular were very keen on. So sadly, Hoggard Army, I can't give you a nice, easy answer, but I will say, delighted to see you in the stream. Really nice for you to drop into the comments. And if you do have any other questions, feel free to drop them in. The best place for them is over in the Discord channel in Lawhammer. If you pop in there, we've got a section for Warhammer Q&As and Lawhammer Q&As. The difference being Warhammer is more about the official Warhammer background and how it works, and Lawhammer is very much my game and how I'm going to be presenting it for the Enemy Within when I go live. My empire it's not different to Games Workshop's empire. It's just my empire. It's how my game works. Just like if you're playing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay at home, your empire would almost certainly work however you imagined it worked, and it'd probably be quite different to how I do it. So Lawhammer is very much Andy's version of the world. Yours would be, I should presume, Hoggard Army Hammer, which actually sounds pretty cool. In the ground, says Heron, presumably about our aesthetic. English gentry used to move hermits into their estates as fashion statements. Oh, I see. So you're looking at it as more of a fashionable flagellant that is brought in for reasons. So again, why? What's Hallskrug doing? Who's he trying to impress? What's the purpose? He's a calculated man. He never does anything without a reason. Where would this sit with his wife? Is she the one that's pushing for this? She's not a Sigmarite, for example. Is it an aesthetic from a different cult? Do we, for example, have an incense-bound Myrmidian, a seer of some sorts, perhaps, who prays to Myrmidia? You've got to remember, Myrmidia's father is Mor, and Mor is the god not only of death, but of dreams and prophecy. And there's entire sections of the Myrmidian cult that are dedicated to Myrmidia and Mor. Indeed, there's rumors, general rumors, around that the very name Myrmidia just means beloved of Mor. It doesn't even really mean anything. It's not her real name, so to speak. She had a different name. There's various old texts that speak to Margelio or Marilla or various other names. So, yeah, there's lots of things that you could drill down within that one, particularly if you want to go away from the standard Sigmarite. But again, the big question is, why is this person here? What's going on? Heron then adds, it was part of the movement against industrialization in the 18th to 19th century. Again, if we want to reflect that somehow, how do you think this character could be best represented? Legio Victor then says, absolutely well said. Did not mean to infer a similarity between chaos and feminism. Yeah, I know you didn't, and I apologize for making it sound like that's what I thought you were trying to say. Before I even finish your comment, I'll finish your comment first and then I'll give my bit. I understand the importance of that. I was trying to make a different way Slanesh should tempt other than sex, and I appreciate it, that, because it's one of the things that we've been trying to do throughout the course of these streams, and that's look at the Chaos Gods and try to make sure that we build something that's absolutely grounded in what that god is, but isn't just the same as you always get. So we don't just get another Khorne cult that's people spilling blood and hitting each other, or another Nurgle cult that's all about doctors and disease and similar, or another Slanesh cult that's all about nobles having parties. Those cults are important, but they're so well written in so many different places that we can almost just say, and there's a faction of this cult doing this here, and be done with it. If we're trying to create something interesting and new, it's worth doing here. But I will see one other thing in this as well. And that's how important it is to ensure that we do incorporate chaos cults in pretty much every city that we create. The reason being, and it's a primary theme as well for My Enemy Within, is that the Warhammer world is at 5 minutes to midnight. The setting has always been that. It's always been, it's on the cusp of a great chaos invasion. It's about to come, and it's likely going to end the world. Unexpectedly, Games Workshop actually ended it as they decided they were done with Warhammer and wanted to move on to something new to revivify their lines. But of course, they'll come back to it again, as is inevitably going to be the case. That doesn't change the core setting, though. This is 5 minutes to midnight. That means that the Warhammer world is currently in a worse position than it has ever been in, ever before, at any time. So when you read all those stories about how bad it was in Magnus's time, about all the mutation that was rising, cults coming from throughout the woodwork, how the empire was rotten to its core, that's this empire, but this one's worse. But the people who are living in the empire just don't see that. It's their day-to-day life. They think it's kind of normal. They think it was terrible in Magnus's time, and Magnus fixed it. And it's all good now. But that's not the case. If anything, now it is worse. And that's one of the core themes that we'll be drilling into through the course of the actual play. We have people who are in a position to directly make that clear, because one of the joys of the Warhammer world is that it doesn't just have humans. It's got lots of long-lived individuals who have been through all of the eras that came before, who can look at each one and say, that was bad, that one was bad. What we're in today is actually the worst. We're doomed, man. We're doomed. So yeah, it's one of the reasons I like to make sure that we definitely do include chaos cults. It's perhaps a bit of a stereotype for Warhammer games, and we all know it's kind of fantasy Cthulhu, and there's cults all over the place. And yeah, that's true. And yes, it does sometimes lapse into stereotype, and the chaos cultists are almost humorous in the way they're presented. The Enemy Within in particular did establish that almost as an ideal way to present them, particularly because they're poking fun at the cultists. But that doesn't change the big point that the world is broken to its fundamental core, and we need to make sure that we represent that in everything, even when we're presenting something that's polished and perfect and wonderful. Say, for example, we were to drill into a part of Ulthuan, and we were to go into Eataine and show a high elven city that was in a very good state. Very clean towers, everything else. That doesn't change the fact that Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is a grubby fantasy. No matter how white it may appear at a distance, it isn't. Everything's broken to its core, and how best to reflect that is part of our jobs as creators, as GMs, or whatever, to try and make sure that our version of the Warhammer world accurately reflects the Warhammer world and not the real world. The real world is awful for a whole host of very different reasons, but nowhere near as awful as the Warhammer world. They would play hermits to live in grottos, in the gardens, give counsel, act as living arts installation. Now we're talking. I'm quite liking this. This is sounding pretty cool. Could be something Zinchi. Yes, it could be. Love it. Your Magnus the Pious sounds like Joseph II, enlightened absolutist. Can't wait to stick around. I'm super interested to see what Magnus the Pious appears like in the old world when they release it. Magnus the Pious is a wonderful character. Absolutely adore him. There's two different versions of him that have been presented loosely. One is let's call him the Karl Franz version. The way Karl Franz was turned into the perfect statesman, Sigmar Reborn. And Magnus was Sigmar Reborn. He was perfect. And then you've also got this slight, say, this undercurrent of subversion to that stereotype. And because it's history, you can say that the story has been spun up into something almost golden and perfect and pure, where the past was almost certainly dirtier and less certain. And I'm really interested to see whether they just do what they always do in the studio, which make their heroes so heroic that they're almost cartoons rather than real people, which is what they effectively in the end did with Karl Franz. And that's a character that I need to rationalize for my version of the Enemy Within. And indeed, I'm having a great deal of fun doing so. Or whether they will take, for example, what Genevieve said in, I think it was Drachenfels or Beasts and Velvet, one of the other books, where it said that Magnus was not so pious, he tried to stick his hand up her skirt. And it's that slight line that's moved through the background that Magnus was not necessarily a good guy. To do everything that he did, you need to have a certain determination of character. And whether that was determination that came from him or others is definitely something to consider. You've got to realize he basically told the cult of Sigmar, the most powerful institution that supported him, to go fuck themselves. In that, they said there will never be a legal wizard in the Empire. And he said, yeah, nah, I'm speaking to Teclis here and Fenrir and Yertle, and we're having ourselves a powwow. And we need wizards. If we don't have wizards, we're going to lose. So we're going to have wizards. We're going to train them. And all those people you've been burning as witches, they're coming in. Come to Daddy. Come to Papa. We're going to make you into new legal wizards. He completely rewrote the, not just Empire in terms of what he did to it, but he rewrote the book as to what was and what was not acceptable in the Empire as a whole. And Sigmarite policy had determined so much of it before that. And Magnus, the greatest Sigmarite ever, stood against his own cult, or at least the cult that supported him, in an enormous fashion. That takes an enormous strength of will or something else. And there's some really cool stories you could tell with that. If, for example, you're doing a novel or examining it as a role-play game, or perhaps just as a game developer looking at the overall story that you're going to pitch for the old world, there's loads of cool you could do. I fear that those cool potentials won't be plumbed because it requires a level of understanding of the Warhammer world that a lot of people don't necessarily have. They don't realize just how much wizards are anathema to Sigmarites, while simultaneously happily pontificating about it all day and having Magnus create the colleges of magic. It's a super fascinating thing to potentially discuss. Heron then says, on the Myrmidian Seer, interpreting dreams could be really fun. I think so too. A good hook if your players need some guidance to head in one direction or another. Yes, that's one of the reasons why we added 2 points in not Empire in Shadows, probably Enemy in Shadows. First, I personified the old Seer situation that was dropped into the Schaffenfest. And we added a reference to Mystic Meg for those of you who are from the UK. If you don't know Mystic Meg, do a quick Google search and you will see a ridiculous wig on a horoscope chasing person. She did horoscopes every week on UK TV for the National Lottery. That's where she really became very, very famous, but she also did it for newspapers. So we did a reference to her in Enemy Shadows. Well, I say we, I did it. As I mentioned before earlier in this stream, Graham and I, when we were doing the Enemy Within, Graham did the primary writing and I did all of the updating and making sure everything worked. I added, for example, the speech with the Manic Street Preacher, which is the second reference to a seer. The first reference to a seer, the Manic Street Preacher, was super important to establish the overall plot for the whole Enemy Within, but also to make reference to something that had popped up more than once in old Enemy Within material and grounding it into the new version. And the Mystic Meg character, Mystic Megrit, was added purely for this reason, to give your players some potential guidance, and to also act as a potential, I mean, it could be a patron or potentially someone who's going to be teaching them if they want to go down the seer route themselves. There's lots of fun ways that that character could be used. I intended to use that character later, actually, but because I didn't do the writing for the final sections, or indeed the middle sections of the Enemy Within, that didn't happen. Heron then says, alternatively, plenty of hooks around nobles having unfavorable interpretations, needing a ragtag bunch of adventurers to change their fate. Quite. Alternatively, the seer is in Halskrug's employ and he's using them to interpret dreams in a way to benefit his cause. Now, this is much more likely. And I think this is speaking directly to what I was discussing earlier about ensuring that we completely nail home the primary tones and themes of this city and this location. That the theme here is Halskrug is in control. And every single thing that we add should at the back of it have, and Halskrug has this for this reason. And that Halskrug is in control might not be Lightmund Halskrug. It could be one of the other Halskrugs who have established something here. But the idea of having a seer who is gathering the hopes and dreams of others, almost like a confessor, and then taking them over and passing them on to Halskrug's mother, for example, makes for an interesting political situation. And definitely one that I think would be worth diving into. Fred Slipknot 9. Hiya, Fred. Great to see you in the stream. Says Andy, talking of more original takes on Chaos Cults. Could we help the local Shallians being corrupted by Khorne? So we already have several Shallian references in the city. We have two primary locations that are worth mentioning. Number one is here, the one that's sort of in the center of the screen, where Shallians are working with others inside this building. And the other part is their Mercy House down here, which they've lost control of and is currently being used by a bunch of pit fighters as a training hall. So you definitely could potentially tie that in slightly. You know, maybe even a Shallian that, and you got a fighting hall down there. You know, there might be something we could do with that. That should go into the Discord discussion about the Mercy House of Shallia down the side. So if there's anyone that's over on the Discord just now, if you can find that location, Martin's been busy filling them out for as we go. That was only 2 streams ago, so it should be relatively near the top. We're looking for that location on the map, the one in the center, and a quick note saying something about Shallians falling to Khorne as a completely unexpected outcome. I like it, Fred. Good call. I am, however, doing altogether too much chatting today and not enough mapping. So let's get some of this map in place, shall we? Right, so I'm imagining some sort of really nice big entrance hall sitting at the front. Sort of entranceway, pardon me. Coaches can wheel up into this area, or possibly we have a nice court, somewhat a little like the marble court that sits in front of Versailles, as I recall. It's got a really nice court that's all marbled out. In fact, it might be worth having a court within a court. Quite like that. The idea that there's this section here, which is particularly, yeah, possibly with marble that's been mined from the mountains further up. If I pull out and go to my reference map here, the reference map shows you the surrounding area. This is from my master map. So here's Kalegen, and that's the city that we're currently mapping. And the Herzog Schwart up here is the mountains, the hills that are ruled by the Holzkrug. It's the Duchy of Holzkrug here, obviously. And I'm still a little surprised, given we had the Duchy of Holzkrug here, that they said that they came from Grumfeld in the other book. I'm a little bit bemused by that. I'm going to have to really read the Altdorf book someday to see what they did to everything, because the Duchy of Holzkrug's a pretty well-established place. I'm very bemused by this one. So we've got Holzkrugberg, which is where the Holzkrugs traditionally seat, but now they're holding court up in Kalegen. And they've got a variety of ores and minerals and precious metals that are coming from there. And I think we could probably add marble to that. I think that would work really nicely. So that being the case, let's go back up there and potentially add ourselves a nice little marble court, somewhat similar to what they did with Versailles. Almost makes me want to go have a little look at a picture of Versailles marble court. It was big, though. I mean, the marble court in Versailles, I mean, how big is it? It must be about 20, 30 meters wide. How big is this one? 10, 20, 30, 40? Oh, it's a sort of similar size. That's not too big. Our court is far larger than Versailles, but Versailles in total is much, much larger than what we're building with this map. I keep referencing Versailles because I know Versailles quite well from doing quite a lot of research for it when I was playing a 10-year campaign of Vampire the Masquerade. And the French court were very important to that particular game. So I wanted to make sure that I had it relatively realistically depicted in my game. Obviously, in the end, it's never going to be completely realistic. After all, you're playing vampires, for goodness sake. But yeah, relatively realistic. Right, I'm having a wee think of where we're going to be putting individuals. And I think I want to have my Celestial Tower over in one of the wings. So this is a tower that was built for Celestial Wizards to attract one of them to come to Kalegen. And now the daughter lives in. So that's the daughter of House Holzkrug. So I'm going to add one here. We're going to have an observatory dome on this one as well. So it's going to be a big dome sitting on the top. Observatory, a long thin tower, perhaps a couple of small classic wizard tower extras sitting off the edge of that. So we want a large roundish tower around here somewhere. It's going to have to be at least, right, in terms of size, if we're going to have an orrery in there, and if we're going to have a big telescope, we're probably going to be looking at least 8 to 12 meters, maybe bigger. Maybe even bigger if we do some sort of engineering marvel in there. Okay, yeah, I'm the reason I'm looking around my room is because I'm imagining the space in my head, and when I'm in the room, I use the room's dimensions to imagine how big the things are. Now, I'm not thinking something as ridiculous as Aughra from the Dark Crystal, but I'm imagining some sort of orrery in there, and a big telescope sitting out, a big crooked lens at the end of that. Yeah, that'd be well cool. So I'm thinking over here, we can get our round tower starting. Let's quickly fill that in. If it's an observatory, we're going to have a nice, well, let's do a cross line over it first. Let's break that and pop that there with its, yeah, I can see how that's going to go. Love it. Drop. We'll worry about the shape of that and the high when we do our highlights and shades. So we've got a couple of side towers coming off of that. They go down lower, hanging out over the walls, and maybe another one over here with its own balcony, and one overlooking the River Bergen. There's an elf living in here too, alongside the daughter. He is training her just now and ensuring that her unique talents are not demonstrable to anybody else. When I ended the world in my version of Warhammer, by the end of it, the magic had gone so wild that it had to be generally legalized for nobles to have it as well, because so many of the nobles started demonstrating magical talents that they just changed the laws. And we ended up with an empress on the throne post Karl Franz, who was also a magic user, which was somewhat controversial. Cult of Sigmar wasn't so happy. Then the Cult of Sigmar also started manifesting wizards all over the place. That was a thing. You can only say magic is heresy for so long when you're doing it yourself. Right, so a lot of the plots from my end of the world were designed to be examinations of the bigotries that the Warhammer world was redolent with, some of which had come from the 80s and were unfortunate, but some of which were added to the setting at a later date, just to add that bit of extra depth. And one of those bigotries was the way that they dealt with mutants and wizards et al. And that was certainly a fun thing to examine. I tend to find that when I'm building my plots, I'm not just doing the rule of cool, although the rule of cool wins for me more times than I would like to admit. I'm also thinking about what's the overall message for what we're doing. Does it match the tones and the themes for the campaign? Is it saying anything? Because my players are always interested in plumbing in more of the background and having a good think about what it all means. And if it doesn't mean anything, then what? No, this is an open area. This is a courtyard. Stop. I was about to fill that in. Right, what we're going to do with some of these palaces of this tend to have loads of little courtyards sitting in the middle. I'm going to actually do a couple of small ones. But yeah, they tend to build up because there's been additions added here or there. Got to be careful how I... Yeah, but he's looking to build cul-de-sacs. Just thinking about how best to do this. While I'm doing that, I'm going to quickly have a check of the comments again. So last one, next one's from Esty. So the Shallians want the Mercy House back. Yes, they do. What if, as a cruel joke, the current occupants tell a priestess that she can have it back if she wins a pit fight? having a no, Esther, let me just pause on that one for a moment. I'm trying to think about how to make this work because they wouldn't. Having said that, though, I've had, even in my games, a warrior priestess of Shalia. She went down a very interesting route. Much as I mentioned earlier about Myrmidia being the daughter of Mor, Shalia, Myrmidia's sister, is the daughter of Verena, the ultimate lawyer. And this Shalian pretty much lawyered the tenets of her cult to allow her to fight in a variety of weapons, a variety of ways, pardon me, and to allow her to wield steel and not break her tenets. And it was a fascinating examination into what it was to be a Shalian, and the frustrations that were involved with that. She was a really interesting character. She was also originally a con woman, so a really nice developing story that went from someone that was without any morals at all, guiding her step-by-step existence, to someone that had sequestered herself in the cult of Shalia to effectively escape from some really bad people and then find faith. And what that meant when you combined her old way of thinking with her new faith. Super fascinating character. And that's often what I'm looking for when we're building characters. Ones that allow you to examine the belief systems, the thoughts, the ethics. Why do people believe certain things? And what happens if they stand contrary to them? What do the various strictures of Sigmar mean? And what happens when you break them? And who cares? And why do they care? Beyond just simply you receiving some form of horrible curse. Exactly how does this all manifest? So I think that there is potentially something in that, but you would really need to have characters where that would work, because the Shalians would say piss off, because that's clearly a cruel joke. And I think that is a very good outcome and I like it. But I can't see the Shalians ever picking them up on it. If we could somehow figure out a way for that to happen, or perhaps for a Shalian to fall and possibly fall to Khorne, there's definitely something in that. Quite liking it. Heron then says, having a bit of a staircase leading up to the main entrance would be good. Hallskrug greets guests from the top of the stairs, symbolically placing him above and having them make the effort to approach him. A classic piece of power play. Yeah, I don't think that's a bad idea. We can have that. In fact, we can even have a break on the way into that leads into the main entrance halls. Whoops, that's very squint. Whatever, I'll just pop it in for the moment so we remember they're there. Then build them out from that point on a curve. I'll tidy that up afterwards just so we know loosely what we've got. Yeah, I quite like that as a general idea. I think we should also, if we're making this a modern one, and if we have him having made deals with the Bright College, it's super important that we have easy access. One of the key Bright Wizards in my game is the Master Apprentices of the Brights. And he was horrendously injured on the front line and gets around in a wheelchair. And he is an enormously influential person in the colleges, the Bright College in particular. And a primary opponent, Cyrus Gorman, as well, although he does the apprentices and is in charge of them. He doesn't agree with Cyrus's overall, let's say, rule, which is very court-based. He believes in the independence of the colleges. And I think having him would be nice. So if they're building this palace to spec, they will have easy access in a variety of areas as well to ensure that those folks who are perhaps not as easily able to get upstairs can do so. So let's make sure that we accommodate that, because Hallskrug is not a stupid man. He will not be looking to alienate others, and he is a thinker, so he will be looking for ways to impress people who are normally unimpressed. That wizard in particular hates the Imperial Palace and everything that it represents, largely because he can't get into it. Not with ease. And casting a gigantic bridge of fire into there is probably not the most politic thing to do. More likely to get you assassinated than anything else. So let's have ourselves a clear frontage to the front of it. Just drop a couple of circly bits to give the idea of some form of statuary or something similar. And then we'll have front buildings coming off that. Yeah. The thing with palaces from above is that they can often look a bit dull because they just tend to be lots and lots of boxes with lots of just chimneys and little else of real interest. For the lines, chimneys are often moved to the back or hidden behind other things so that you can't see them, but you can't forget to include them because they are an essential component. Oops. Or do I make this central courtyard? No, because I'm going to need to have space for a larger ballroom. I can have that off to the side. Yeah, let's have it off to the side. Let's remove that one. Let's have most of this space taken up with a couple of galleries leading around a major ballroom, which means if we're going for our big glass dome that we discussed earlier in the stream, we want to have that here. Now, if we're going to do the proper thing, we have a few choices for what sort of shape that our dome should be. One option is to go with the tribes of Sigmar, the 12 tribes of Sigmar, and make it a 12-sided shape. Another one is to go with the classic 8. 8s, however, are often associated with chaos, so you have to be careful with that nonsense. But 8 is used for a variety of reasons and has mystical significance, not necessarily in the Empire, but in the Warhammer world as a whole. Or we could go for an order number, perhaps representing, well, we did suggest that we were going to do, say, the 20 zodiac signs. So maybe we're basically looking at a circle with 20 separate sections on it. So if I just drop a quick circle for our big glass dome there, and imagine that we've got ourselves that broken up into 20 sections. So we're looking at about that. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, there we go. That'd be a 20-sided one. So each one of those being a straight line. So that would be our dome. 20-sided with each one of these sides having a frieze depicting a different god. And a star sign. And we can do things like have some of the more obscure gods like Nuthus the ox, for example. He can be in there. Patron deity of Ostland, big red bull. Particularly timely given the Chaos Dwarf release. Can't go wrong with a bull-headed god. Whoops. Nuthus the ox, known for being super stubborn, but as Warhammer gods go, one of the least discussed. I almost wrote spells for him at one point when we were doing Tome of Salvation all the way back in 2nd edition. Okay, so here is our 20. There we go. Let's have a clear center. There we go. And give the idea that there's some sort of Gothic-y decorations sitting their way over these dome and the main struts. Each one of these is decorated with a beautifully represented stained glass window. It's just gagging to be smashed by a PC. A character coming along and trying to sneak their way in, or more realistically, fall through it and land in the area below. One of the great joys of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay over other games is that you can do that sort of crap and not worry too much about it because your PCs have got lives. They're pretty much like Mario as they're making their way around, but hopefully not like the Mario in the current movie because apparently not so good. Maybe it is. I've not watched it. I shall not judge. But yeah, you got lives. And you can even earn extra lives by doing particularly great deeds and getting yourself more fate points. All right, so I think we've got a pretty good idea of what that looks like above our. That's pretty big. So, I mean, that's a big vaulted. Just imagining how they're actually going to build that. It's going to be hard. I imagine that there has been support here from Magic to get this in place. And as we know, Hallskrug has already made a deal with the Bright College. Not exactly known constructors, though. The Brights, they're more destructors, not constructors. Doesn't mean that he hasn't got good relations with some of the other colleges as well. Yeah, okay, I'm sort of liking that. I'm going to pull this part of the building out and get a connection point for the wings. Move up to a point on the roof. Love it. Yeah, okay. I'm going to have a quick look in the comments again. Esty goes, before I try a suggestion that doesn't make sense, how sacrosanct are Salians? Would it be almost unthinkable to hurt one, or is it very individual how much a person... It's very individual. I mean, how sacrosanct is it not to a Sigmarite? How sacrosanct? Everyone's got their own opinions. A lot of individuals really dislike the Salians and their ridiculously sanctimonious view of pacifism. The cult of Ulrich just does not get on with Shallians at all. Now, does that mean you go punch a nun? You absolutely don't. And I'll admit I'm lapsing into gender stereotypes here by saying that they're all nuns, but most of them are. The cult of Shelia is dominated by women. And I mean, who punches nuns? Very few people do. It's not a common practice, and in general, I think that's a nice place to start. I saw a really good game with a Shallian nun in it once, where she would pretty much just put herself in front of every combat and say, "Stop! Stop! This battle is not ready yet." And that went quite well with bandits and similar, because they were like, "Yeah, I don't want to be punched. I don't want to piss off Shalia. You know, that's not a clever thing to do." But it didn't work so well with goblins or Skaven, for example. They're like, "Oh, time to make the stabby McStab." So yeah, it is down to an individual thing. Can you go around punching nuns? You absolutely can. Should you? You probably shouldn't. And I imagine your average person on the street is not so keen on doing that sort of thing. But there's going to be all manner of folks who have no problems with it at all. The Warhammer world's a pretty dark and grim place after all. Estes adds, nah, never mind. I think the idea I had is a bad one. It might not be. Nothing worth giving it a go. And one of the great things about sharing ideas like this is, even if it's bad, when we talk it out, we might land on something that's really good. That's part of the fun of I think these streams in general, that the talking out of everything gives an opportunity to discuss ideas that we might not have ourselves considered. All the ideas that are getting presented in this stream are clearly ones I would never have come up with myself, because I didn't come up with them, you did. And I really, really, really like that as a part of the nature of how these streams work. But sometimes some of the ideas look like they're initially totally inappropriate, but with a little bit of thought, suddenly it all makes sense. And you're like, hey, wait a minute, that'd be really, really cool. And ultimately, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the cool. What's going to work to create some really, truly awesome, memorable experiences with what we have. I did that the wrong way around again. Okay, this palace is going to be pretty big. Let's have ourselves a couple of good old empire-y, towery bits at the front here. Now, a lot of the shapes that I'm putting in place won't make a great deal of sense until we do all of the highlights and the shading. And clearly, I'm not going to get anywhere with that in this stream. Indeed, I've barely even touched these towers because I've been just talking and talking and talking. This has been quite the chatty stream, this one. But having said that, I've rather enjoyed it. We are already moving up to the point where I'm going to have to stop, because I have a test stream tomorrow. It's not really a stream. It's more of a test recording tomorrow. And I need a map for that. and a couple of other things which I currently don't have. So I'm going to draw them once I'm done with this. So as you may note, my evenings on Thursday are very much map evenings where I just get everything ready for the next day on the Friday. And when I'm going to be streaming live, that's probably going to be most of my Thursday evenings. During the day, I'll be doing my rookery bits. Like today, I was building some rules. Super fun stuff as well. Super fun stuff. In fact, really enjoying what we're doing with that one. Where when 6 o'clock passed, I stopped and went, it's time for my mapping break. We've gone on to this. Okay, so we've got ourselves a bit more of that palace in place. It's really beginning to form up. And as was mentioned before, it's a bit of a chunky boy. Getting pretty big. Okay, let's sort out the remainder of the wing where the daughter lives. And probably the mother as well. Perhaps maybe most of the Hull's crew family lives over there. We can possibly decide on that. Maybe there's a lesser wing. Maybe there's extra family. Extended stallion family, perhaps, for the mother. That might be worth having a consider how that best manifests itself. Yeah, that might actually be worth considering. Get ourselves in a stallion influence. Probably related to one of the Estalian royal lines from the Estalian kingdoms. How we choose to do that, I'm not sure yet, but I'm quite liking the idea of it. Okay, let's make this a big reflection of the classic squares that you often get with these things. Drop in a lot of little extra details to give the idea that this is not like our middle class houses. Let's drop a tower over here as well. Okay. I quite like this place actually. I'm imagining the wings. This is still a lot smaller than what my version of the Imperial Palace in Altdorf is, and I mean a lot smaller. My Imperial Palace in Altdorf is actually astonishingly big. Closer to that Prague Palace. My Imperial Palace has an entire botanica gardens attached to it and sits atop a mount, a hill, one of the 7 hills of Altdorf. Oh, no. I think I want to... No, I do. I'm going to change that, but I'm not. I'm going to stick that as it is. And then let's make that one a tower. I'll just use that as code for a tower at the moment. I may change that later. I'm wanting to have lots of places for folks to stay here. What's the size of this? So just checking there. That's about 10. Okay, so we have corridors there. That's relatively sizable suites. Yeah, that would do quite well. Yeah. Okay, cool. We'll check the comments before I run off. Only one from Martin. Hi, Martin, what are you saying? Martin says, is it going to be a single purple location or split a little with brown sections? Yeah, this is one district of the city. And it would be super easy to just make the whole thing purple and say purple. But no, I think we're going to be highlighting individual sections of the entirety of the palace as a whole and purpling off certain parts of its special locations. So I think that's probably going to be a better way. So we'll mark off the Wizard's Tower wherever the main ballroom is. We won't bother drilling into specifics about individual rooms. Where does the Duke stay or anything? Because it actually doesn't matter. What we're looking for is the big stuff that will lie underneath the castle description as a whole. Yeah, I think somewhat similar actually to how BlackRock handled it. Esty says, I just think it gets dark real fast. Warhammer is dark sometimes, so that's fine. Violence being anathema to Shalia, they initially have to be on the receiving end to go all blood for the blood god, and you can see where this is going. And yes, you're right, that is pretty fucking dark. But that doesn't mean that we avoid it. It's super easy to assume that me, as my rainbow hat wearing feminist lefty, who goes out of his way to ensure that there is strong representation in everything that he does, isn't in any way supportive of, I can't believe I'm going to say I'm supportive of this. This is going to come across as wrong. I see Lindsay cringing wherever she is in Edinburgh right now, but is supportive of bigotry and awfulness. But I am. I think that they create super interesting stories. You just have to be very careful about how you present it. For example, if you happen to be playing, as I am, in a group that's 50% made of women, and they are, as a whole, facing daily sexual discrimination, and their life sucks because of it, and then you go into a game and you say, so we're just going to keep doing this to you, plus there's more and it's worse, then you have to start looking at yourself and saying, is this the sort of bigotry we really want to be exploring? Is this the sort of thing we want to do? Fortunately, with the Warhammer world, it doesn't need to be at all in the slightest. The Warhammer world is so different to the real world. And whilst, yes, sexism exists, I think it exists in quite a different area, and the spectrum of results that it brings are so very different. Power, for example, is not male-dominated in the Warhammer world. There are a lot of men in power of that, there's no doubt. And there's a certain physical dominance that may come across from, say, many of the army figures. Because men, like the real world, men are generally speaking stronger, but not all of them. Indeed, in the Warhammer world, some women are bigger and stronger than the majority of men, significantly so. And I'm not just talking about your Amazonian types. Those who are blessed by the gods, those are suffused with one of the winds of magic, those who are just different. And there is a lot of people who are different in the Warhammer world are common. Not only that, but the regressive male-dominated thinking that has plagued the halls of power in the real world is not the case in the Warhammer world. There is, at its basic starting point, a host of cults which are dominated with a variety of people, men, women, and others, who have strong influences on not just politics, but the overall world. Not every part of the Warhammer world follows male son comes first. Reikland, my Reikland, it does. In my Reikland, firstborn son inherits. But in my Wizenland, firstborn daughter inherits, because of the long heritage that Wizenland has with the Cherison people upright in the past. And they were led by warrior queens. And that has passed down through the centuries into how they handle their succession. And different parts of the empire handle it in different ways all over the place. And it's just not the real world. So whilst, yes, there's sexism, bigotries of various types, they're not in any way as ingrained as they are in the real world. And that's something that I'm quite happy to be the case, because it means that we can focus on completely different things. Whether you go for your classic elves and dwarves hate each other, species getting on each other's wick. But yeah, the whole, othering of people because they're different is so different in a fantasy realm. And to a degree, there's so many more different sorts of people living cheek to jowl with each other. My Altdorf is a rainbow of people. Utterly bewildering when I see people online going, oh yes, the Warhammer world has to be sexist, it has to be this and that and the other. And like, yeah, you really haven't thought through everything that's in the Warhammer world, have you? A man that beats down on a woman is going to find themselves in a bit of a shock when the god comes along that woman worships and smites them. There's going to be a very different power disparity sitting there. Yeah, it's just not the same. It's just not the same. So, yeah, different. So I have no real desire to inflict upon people the bigotries that they suffer in real life. I remember watching once. It was a horrendous experience. I was at a con. I won't say what con because I won't want to bring this up. And I was making my way through, and there was a table of mixed races dealing with a story that dealt with racism. And that sounds fine. But it wasn't. It really wasn't, because the GM, who was very white, had his black players playing black characters being basically bullied for 4 hours. It was the fucking worst. If ever you wanted to see an example of how not to do roleplay, it was that. Just actually awful. And they just sat there going, no, it's fine, because this is just like the real world. And it's like, dude, no. How to make acceptable racism? Seriously, just no. Think of what you're doing, dude. So yeah, I have issues that may differ from other people's issues, and inevitably what goes on at people's tables will go on at their tables, and that's cool. What everyone's happy with is fine, but I have no desire, for example, to inflict an incredibly sexist world on my players. Unfortunately, the Warhammer world, by its very design, wouldn't be. So it's not an issue I have to deal with. However, I was dealing with, say, a Cthulhu game set in the 1920s, then I would certainly dial down on it. But I would be looking to prick holes in the ridiculous thinking that allowed the sexism to stay in place, and to show it for the foolishness that it is, because that's just kind of what I do. Anyway, what other comments do we have? Because I apparently have just gone off on one. Corn approves. I'm not sure what Corn approves of, and I'm going to assume that Shellians are getting beat up. I mean, it's pretty horrible, but Corn cares not from where the blood flows. So yeah, good point. Maybe the Shellians opened their door to a group of down and out, broken and bloody pit fighters and unwitting followers of Corn. Yeah, there's something in this. We've got our pit fighters. See, I don't want to turn. I mean, it's so easy to turn it into yet another, blood beating each other up, culty thing. And I feel like I really like the idea of Shellians falling into Corn. See, let's look at it from a slightly different angle, because there is a really strong angle that we have here. Shellians, particularly fundamentalists, are all about pain. Flagellation is very common among some fundamentalist nuns. And Corn cares not from where the blood flows. There's definitely something in that. So a hardline fundamentalist Shellian whipping herself into a spittle-laced frenzy, not hitting people with fists, but whipping up crowds to do it on her behalf. So maybe a firebrand who's trying to take back the Shellian Mercy House and is speaking to the locals. And she whips herself and bloodies herself every single day. And she whips other people up using her words to get into an almost bloodied frenzy. That, I think, works really interestingly for a Shellian. So we're not now talking about Shellians getting beaten up and punching each other. We're talking about a religious fundamentalist who has fallen to Corn because of her devout Shellian beliefs, and is not only causing the blood to flow from herself, but from her very actions and deeds as the pit fighters are attacked or someone else is attacked, and we get somebody who's falling. You've got every single character has an opportunity to fall to one of the Chaos Gods. And I think Corn for Shalia may not be initially obvious, but if you take that as a route, you've got a really strong story that you can build on there. Really quite like that. I think there might be something in that. Martin then adds, the Shellians saw in the pit fighters a similar mindset to have to persevere, indeed, making more money by taking a beating. And indeed, perseverance is very much a Shellian virtue. So I think there's potentially quite a lot in that. Yeah, I think there is possibly quite a lot in that. So that could be taken and run with, I think. Yeah, you could really get yourself some Cornate Shellians there, or at least one that's fallen. What happens when, the whispers of the dark gods are at your ear, giving you a route out? If they took the temple on your behalf. You are not raising a sword. You are not breaking your tenets. You are not doing anything that breaks the actual rules. Ah, yeah, you got something good in that. I was going to leave that as an open courtyard. Never mind. It's not anymore. Never liked it as a courtyard anyway. Let's add in. Let's straighten that out a little as well and tuck that in. What time are we at? We should probably be stopping soon. We apparently have gone on for quite some time just discussing what to put in this, which, as I say before, I'm not against, because all these ideas. Oh, I can't draw straight tonight. Wow. That'll be straight enough for me now, because that really wasn't wanting to play for me. I'm going to put my court over about here-ish, where we're going to be playing our sport of whatever type it is. Yeah. I think we can get ourselves a pretty good corn worshipping stallion out of this. There's a good story in that. Firebrand. Basically an agitator. If anyone has any ideas of how to develop that further, feel free to drop it in the comments. Although I will say we're reaching the point now where I think we probably want to think about stopping for this week. We have done a lot of work in putting the lines in place here. It'd be nice if we finished off the main building at least a little bit. Let's zoom out and have a look at how much of it's going. Oh, it's huge, isn't it? It massively dominates the city. Look at it. Oh, I love it. Yeah, that's putting a smile on my face. Yeah, that feels like something that is worthy of the name Holzkrug. Build it something worthy of my name. Okay, Uncle Sauron. Right. Cool. So that's going to be one of the gardens. Might want to segment that off, make something really pretty. I'm still unsure how I'm going to use that. The old road that went to the Temple of Mor went up that way and up that way and over there. So I might want to incorporate that somehow. Oopsie, went too far there. Let's finish off this little bit in the main building here. I'm actually getting quite excited by this whole space. I'm imagining moving through it. I'm imagining what the roofs look like. I'm imagining the towers. I can see them. The tall tower that the Celestial Wizard was originally planned to inhabit. I can see how that all works. Individual higher areas. Love it. Possibly make this an internal chapel. So we can have this as a tall bell tower as well. Let's split that one up as two. Yeah. Okay, so I'll finish off the main part of the palace here, then check the comments, and then I'll make a call as to whether we should do any more. I'm inclined to do more because I'm actually really enjoying where this is going. I'm sort of seeing it all go, but I'm aware Lindsay's going to be home. I'm also aware I've got to do a whole map tonight, and I don't really fancy doing a mapping session up to like 4 in the morning. Doing a battle map normally takes me about 2 hours, 3 hours. I've already posted about 5 battle maps over on the blog. They're for the all-access Warhammer folk. I'm going to be doing maps, not weekly, but close to weekly, for the all-access sections. There's going to be quite a lot of maps. Some of them are going to be popped up for free. They're the primary ones for the enemy within. They'll all just be popped up so that anyone can use them. But no, I want that to be a frontage like we had over on the other side. So, but others will be up for all access people, as will the blogs that discuss why I'm doing the enemy within the way I'm doing it. the GMing side of things, I suppose. For example, for those of you who know the Enemy Within, I've been reworking the NPCs there, why they are there, what they're doing, and in one case, one of them is changing completely because the existing NPC did nothing for the overall narrative, and I would like to support the narrative if I can with the NPCs that I have. And I don't want to waste any moments because I intend to whiz through, and I do mean whiz, the first three, the first three sections of the Enemy Within campaign. That being the case, I can't afford to waste any time with any of my NPCs. I have a lot of plot to serve, and I have to make sure that it is all covered, and all the primary tones, motifs, themes, et al. Are marked in place. And obviously, I need as many opportunities as possible to do really stupid accents. My accents are terrible. Again, I apologize ahead of time. Okay, let's make that overlap slightly. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Let's have our marble area. Oops. I want it to be right there. Second house there. Okay. Let's zoom out and have a look at the overall palace area now. That's really beginning to take shape. Yeah, that's really beginning to take shape. That's beginning to look like a place. I can see why it was built the way it was built. I can see the way each of the buildings were organized. Best utilization of the space as well. Yep, this is good. Let's have a quick check of the comments before I decide if I'm doing any more. Martin then says, do we have a library archive in the palace yet? We don't have one marked. Halskrug himself would only be interested in that for the influence it would provide. He himself is not a great reader. His wife has no real push in that direction as of yet. Her primary religious leanings are tinged by Verena, so possibly a desire to have definitely a larger study, well-educated children, or child in this particular case. But yeah, nothing marked as of yet, other than there'd probably be one in there. One of the priestesses goes to the Mercy House every day to protest, says Esty. And as she has gotten more and more upset in its current use, she started to go to more and more extreme protest actions. And the more extreme acts ends up whipping some supporters into a frenzy. Yeah. I'm getting VHS flashbacks for some reasons. Is that because it's beginning to look like a tape? Is that what you're referencing? It's sort of like a VHS cassette for the front. I hope that's what you're referencing, because that's what I'm seeing now. That's amusing. Okay. I am going to do a little bit more. I refuse to be stopped. I want to see what the rest of this wing over here looks like when we start putting it into place. We haven't had any discussion as to what our wings represent or what they're primarily used for. Oh, whoops, I'm still in the red. So I don't really have any particular tone or theme for the type of building that I should have here, other than I probably, again, want to have some sort of inner courtyard. So I'll have a smaller one on here, and I'll probably use relatively generic roofing, except for the main bit of the side, which can be primarily a main palace building of some type, probably bed chambers of some type, or maybe council halls, chambers, or I'm not entirely sure what, but definitely something important over here. I appear to have a slightly larger brush. I don't, but I appear to have one. Let's okay. Again, I don't want to put too many details on these, even though this is a very detailed building in general, because it doesn't really bring much to the party. Our textual description is going to do most of the job. Our aim here is to convey the size and the overall positioning of everything. That needs to be a bit smaller. Yeah, that's better. Okay, now what we're going to do with this bit, I think I'll segment it off again. Build it into clear sections, each one of which has got its own roofing in place. Yeah. I'm also going to have to think about how we're going to turn the outside building over there into the edge of the menagerie. How that's going to reflect over there, and whether we should have any of that coming out towards the front or not. I'm kind of thinking we probably don't want to. Maybe, in fact, why don't I take this building and do something even more to it and change its nature somewhat. Doing that, let's change the frontage as well. Bring that right round. Yeah, okay. Let's get these parts done now. We're getting there, slowly but surely. This palace, one way or another, is hopefully going to be in place before we break for next week. By next week, if all is going according to plan, we will have a date for when we go live with the Enemy Within campaign, which is enormously terrifying to me. I can't believe we're there already. We have Erin coming around tomorrow, who's our producer. She's going to be sitting in the corner as we play, trying everything out and making sure that it's all working according to plan. Better bloody be. I've spent an enormous amount of this week trying to make sure that everything works. Right, once I've done these sections, I'll check the comments again. I'm pretty pleased with the overall size, the feel of it. The sort of building that we're putting in place makes a lot of sense for the descriptions that we've built. Just quickly fix that. Love it. And then this way. Cool. Look at that. We are definitely on fire. In a good way. Let's pull out and have a quick look at that. Okay. It's quite a complicated building. Do we want to have anything inside our central square, perhaps? We're definitely going to need statues of some type. It's a really big open place. Yeah, I think I want to have some form of like cenotaph type thing sitting in the middle for military purposes. Something that we can use for due patriotism and similar. A couple of important individuals off towards the sides. Maybe an important general. This one's come off very, quite liking the idea that this has come off very cardinally aligned. We can possibly use that as a plot hook somewhere. Why did Halskrug build it to this particular shape, to this particular specification? Because there's definitely something going on here. Yeah. Yeah, okay. I quite like this. Now we need to have ourselves a wall that guards it to the front. A big gatehouse, or at least double gate. Let's have that cardinally aligned as well, actually. So not do what I've currently done. A big tower sitting at the top. And then walls connecting those. Oops. Cool. Hey, I do believe we are almost at the point where we've got ourselves a big proper palace. Before we take a look at the whole thing, I'm going to fill in the roads that should be here on my road layer. If you want to know how I'm doing all of this, I did a tutorial over on the Rookery that explained pretty much every single last process that I'm doing on this map. I should really put links for the Rookery into the description so that you can all find that, because the actual tutorial was pretty damn good, actually. Actually, as I mentioned earlier in the stream, going through a bunch of tutorials for the Rookery, where I'm teaching how to do different styles of tree, coastline, building. No, not building, pardon me. Everything else. Let me just pop those bits in, because this is all. Yeah. Just seeing even that immediately grounds this whole thing into the surrounding reality. If I take that out, yeah, love it. Yeah, that's much better. I hear the sounds of Lindsay and my daughter arriving home. They've been out sword switching, the idol. That's why I choose this evening for my night off to do mapping, because they're both out. Right, let's have a quick look at that. Oh no, I've got the side path here. Oh wow, my brush is too big for this. We just fix that. Love it. Right, let's remove that last bit of path as well while we're here. And let's zoom out and take a look. Oh, look at that. That place is huge. Look at it as the whole city. I want to make some parts of that bigger, but I'm quite liking what we have so far. Let's check our comments. So, yup. So Martin agrees it was that. This is the VHS tape. Glad to hear it. Martin then goes on to say, maybe the menagerie has a tower balancing the celestial observatory. Not a bad idea. Animals are caged in the center with an external walkway with balconies. Quite like the idea of that. And perhaps some of the more exotic, weird flying stuff can be found near the top. Yeah. I quite like that. That's good. Yeah, good idea. An enormous aviary. Yeah, basically, yeah. I think that's a good idea. SD adds, a cage shaped like an observatory with exotic birds flying freely inside. Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. And by exotic, you mean swans. Lots of swans, adds Martin. SD then adds, what could be more exotic than a swan? Martin then goes on to say, of course, Holscrew Aviary has the last breeding pair of the short-necked grey-black swan. To offset the entrance dedicated to Nurgle at the castle. Yeah, quite. I'd like an enormous entrance tower barracks, please. So we want the towers, the barracks to be a bit bigger, do you think? I'm not against that. Maybe the plaza filled with monuments to the famous Holskrug ancestors. We've already got a bunch of those along the road that we're building that goes all the way down through town here. And there's actually, you can see a bunch of them down at this part of the center. This is an entire statuary garden where we've got, you can maybe just catch the colors that are showing there. If I zoom in, you might be able to see a bit more clearly. That's this garden here where old Holskrug ancestors are. But I can see no reason for him not to redouble that particular situation and perhaps strengthen it with even more. Let's add to the road then. Statues as and where it's appropriate. Let me just fill in the rest of this road here as well, because this is all going to be road sitting to the front. I think I agree with you, SD, that we should make our entrance a little bit bigger. So I'm going to do that. Let's make what we have already the center of a larger building by going like so. Yeah. Okay, so if that's the case, we can take the wall off there. We can add in some extra towers sitting on the top of a far larger building. Okay, cool. We have to decide what to do with our boulevard of broken dreams out here as well. How many trees that we should have on it, where they sit. But I'll do that when the whole palace is in place, I think. Let me just get rid of the road here that we don't need for our building. And take a moment to review that. Okay, cool. Let's zoom out and have a look. Maybe not that much. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's looking like a place, isn't it? Once we've popped in all the gardens on that, popped in our aviary, yeah, I think that's going to be gorgeous. Right, so I think I'm going to call it a night there because it's beginning to get late and I've got another map to do. That's coming up to 10 o'clock here in the UK. I have a few things to say to end all things for this evening. Number one, thank you so much for all of your contributions as we've been making our way through mapping Kalegen here. This place would not be the same without you all adding all your cool extra bits. I'd also like to say, if you haven't done so already, please do subscribe to us here at Lawhammer. You'll get notifications about all the videos that we're popping up. And we have some pretty awesome videos coming up for you in the very near future, including our actual play of the Any Within campaign, which, if all goes well tomorrow, we'll be giving a final date for on Saturday. Can I also say thanks to all the people who've agreed to help us on the writing side, because we're going to be starting that up very soon. If you're someone out there right now thinking, I'd quite like to do some writing for this and have my work go alongside everyone else's up in World Anvil, do get in contact over in Discord, because we're about to start that, well, in earnest. We have a lot of writing to do. We have a bajillion locations, including one of the coolest, biggest, castliest, palaciest things that ever did palace, ever. The Holzkrugs have got something to be relatively proud of here, I think. So, without any further ado, I shall say good night and just double check the comments before I go, because that is what I always do. Maybe monuments to the events instead. That's a good idea. Maybe friezes as well on the front of the walls. Ha! Let's not forget that one. Somebody pop that in Discord so we've not forgotten it. Big friezes of big battles and core events that the Holzkrug were responsible for, which included receiving Magnus the Pious in Altdorf, for example. Oh, right, yeah, that'd be well cool. Holzkrug grandfather beating Bretonians at the Battle of Wonderloo. Yeah, that sort of thing. Great idea. Martin says, thanks. Thanks as well for all the help that you've been providing, Martin. You're the best. Esty pops in, great stream. Good night, all. It was indeed a lot of fun. Heron says, great stream. Always fantastic. Thank you very much for saying so. Mark drops in and says, loving this build. Yeah, I'm really loving where it's going as well. Lindsay clearly really enjoys this too. Nico comes in with a thanks, Andy, and good night to you as well. And Alexander says, thank you for the stream. Looking forward to the actual play. I am also massively looking forward to it. I'm not terrified in the slightest.
You're terrified.
I am terrified. Okay, that's not unfair. So thank you all. I shall sign off with a quick salute and a goodbye. That was loads of fun. Well, wait a minute. If I wait for 40 seconds, it's exactly 3 hours long. I'm not that stupid. Good night, evening. Good evening, all. Bye-bye.